pushing his limits.
And he couldn't really say anything. But Abby just mad. He's angry.
With built-in malware protection.
Okay? It's just like
We're gonna have legal today. So.
oh yeah,
That's
it's probably just a good it didn't do
on your license thing, or whatever your car is.
Do you have a toll tag?
Okay, good morning. Welcome to our third class session together. Today is August 21st. Got that right today. And this is Thursday, and this is the marketing management course for the executive MBAs. So does anybody remember anything that we were talking about yesterday?
Joint analysis.
Conjoint analysis. So Jim says conjoint analysis, right? Does anybody want to add anything else that was important that they learned? Anything that we should be remembering? Topics?
Building a model, how to establish that base case, and then add or subtract the modifiers.
Okay, good. All right. So we're talking about how we went about building that model, how we were looking at conjoint analysis as a method of research to understand consumers and what it is that consumers value in a particular product category, and being able to understand what it is in terms of the weights that they place on each of the levels of each of the attributes. And if we can do this for a sample of consumers that represent the population, then we can be able to make some inferences about how the population is likely to behave, and that might allow us along the line of developing new products to help us make decisions about where we want to invest our resources. We can understand a little bit about what's more or less important in terms of the attributes to consumers. We can get an understanding about which of the levels they might be willing to trade off for other levels of attributes. We can get an understanding then, when we put that together with inferences about what products might already be in the marketplace, we can try to get estimates about what our market share would likely to be if we introduced a particular configuration of the product. And then we can also use that if we have some understanding about what our costs are likely to be. We might be able to get some estimates about profitability for a number of different configurations. And that will help us make better decisions based on what we understand about consumers. Because if you remember from the very first day, we were looking at this model of marketing decision making. We said the goal that we have ultimately is to acquire and to retain and to develop profitable customers. And we said that the way that we're going to do this as marketers is we're going to make decisions. So we'll make decisions about what the features and attributes of products are going to be. And we saw in conjoint analysis that we're able to get some information about what those features and attributes should be. We're going to make decisions about pricing. And we saw, again, through conjoint analysis, one of the methods that we can get some information about how changes in price might influence the demand and influence our market share. We can make decisions about distribution or place, and in that case, we actually were looking at a variety of different locations and people's disutility to travel, and that allowed us maybe to make some estimates about where we want to locate the restaurant that we were looking at yesterday. We can also make decisions about promotion, and that will help us get some information about what's important to consumers. And as marketers, we need to make those decisions, but we don't want to make those decisions in a vacuum. We don't want to just say, well, here's what I think is a good idea, but then we want to be thoughtful and purposeful. So we were talking about how before we make these decisions of product, of price, of promotion, and distribution, we should step back and ask ourselves a number of questions so that we can build a strong marketing strategy that's likely to be sustainable. So we'll get some understanding about our company. So what are the goals that the company has in the short run? What are the goals that the company has in the long run? What are the core competencies that the company can lean into? What are our assets? What are our liabilities? What are our values? We can understand these questions, and then we want to ask ourselves some questions about the competition. Who is the competition likely to be if we introduce new products into the marketplace? How are they likely to react? Not only who are they likely to be right now, but maybe who might become the competition if we build a new market. Maybe it'll make it easy for somebody else to come in and take that market share away from us. And so if we want to think strategically about having a long-run advantage, the decisions that we make are going to be made by thinking about who that competition might be likely to be. And then we'll ask ourselves questions about collaborators. So do we have available suppliers? Do we have available distributors? Do we have available strategic alliances that will allow us to do what we need to do? So as an example of collaborators being important, you'll often see now in the automobile industry, you'll often read reports of what would otherwise be competing automobile companies co-investing in companies that build batteries, for instance, because they both need the supply of those batteries, and by having that strategic alliance, they'll be able to build the quantity of automobiles that they need to build in order to have the scale to be able to make the profit that each of those companies are looking for. So having those strategic alliances allows them to be able to make perhaps different decisions about what the product will be, how they will price, how they will promote, and how they will distribute. So we ask ourselves questions about the company, about the competition, about the collaborators. We spent a lot of time on the very first day thinking about stuff that's outside of the control of the company, and by that we call it context. And we'll look at the political, economic, environmental, social, legal, technological changes that might create opportunities for us, but also might create threats to our ability to have this long-term sustainable competitive advantage with a particular mix of product, price, promotion, and distribution. And so in making these decisions about the 4 Ps, we're going to try to understand what it is that customers value. Then we're going to create that value, and then we want to extract some of that value for the business. And yesterday, in talking about conjoint analysis, we were looking at one of the ways in which we can understand what customers value, then we'll create it, and as we started to think about the prices that we will charge in order to be more profitable, and we will spend more time on that in the next week that we come together, we talk more about how we think about extracting that value for the business. And then we also say, of course, it's important to understand customers. And if we look at understanding how customers make decisions, in your reading that I asked you to do, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about this, we can think about it being important. If marketing is all about facilitating that exchange, it often makes us think about the importance of this piece right here, how the customers make purchase decisions. But we also need to think about the entire process that consumers go through. So we might think about early on, long before consumers make a decision, that they have some sort of a need that's being triggered, that they recognize that there's some sort of a goal. There's a space between where they are and where it is that they want to be. And sometimes these need triggers are natural things that happen. I'm hungry, so I need to get some food. Or maybe we just had children, and so now I'm going to have to go out and purchase all of the crib and the bassinet and the stroller and all of these sorts of things. That the need comes as a result of things that are happening for the consumer. I've run out of potato chips, and so maybe that means that I have a need to go and get some more. Other times, marketers might be able to do some things to try and influence those needs, right? So we might be able to do things through our promotions to let people know maybe it's time that we start thinking about this. So if you've ever been in a shopping mall and you smell the pretzels or the Cinnabon and suddenly you realize, wait a minute, maybe I want to eat something that I didn't come to the mall to get a Cinnabon, I came to the mall to get something else, but suddenly you feel yourself desiring such a thing. That's the marketer influencing aromas into the market space that might then influence the needs. So we start off by thinking about what are those needs, when do they happen, and taking advantage of them, or we can do some things to try and influence them. And then after the need is triggered, we know that consumers then search for information. And so if it's a really important decision, something that has financial risk or social risk, or it's a big decision that I'm not going to be able to undo, we call it a high involvement decision, and that means that consumers are gonna, maybe will look online to get information, I'll go to a trade show and gather a lot of information, I'll do research by talking to people who have used the product before, I'll ask my friends, I'll ask my relatives, I'll ask people that are important to me. If it's not an important decision, maybe it doesn't have a lot of risk or a lot of cost, I'll just search my memory for what are some possible options that are gonna solve this problem. So if you find yourself sitting in this classroom thirsty, how am I gonna solve that? You think, well, I seem to remember that there was all kinds of soft drinks down the hall, and as I came into the building, I passed a vending machine, I know there's a cafe downstairs. Those are the options that I might choose from, and then we're done with it. You don't go online and look for all of the possible options where you can get a soft drink around here. You just search your memory. And so as marketers, we want to understand how it is that people go about searching for information, because we want to at least be available, be able to provide the information that leads people to consider our brands, to include them in the consideration set. Or we want to make sure that those brands come into people's memories when it's a low involvement decision. And so that's why we might use different forms of advertising to keep our alternatives as top of mind awareness, so that you've got it in your mind when the option comes up. And then we need to know something about how people evaluate the information. So when I purchase an automobile, is it more important that I get a car with a lot of horsepower, or I get a car with a lot of torque, or I get a car that's got a high safety evaluation? And then when I think about safety evaluation, how does consumers put that information together to decide for them that the car is safe? And so understanding how people evaluate that information can help us make different decisions about the product features that we offer, help us make decisions about how we promote or communicate something about the value of our products. And then after that, consumers make purchase decisions, and then even after they make their purchase decisions, then they evaluate those products. And that's important because we said acquire and retain profitable customers. And so we want to know something about how people evaluate and use the products that we've given them. So a lot of times, I've got some friends who are in the software business, and they're really excited when they get the sale, they're able to bring a company to start using their software. And then they say, well, and now that we've got the money, we're very pleased that we've got the contract, and we never get any calls from these people. They're our best customers. I said, well, they're the best customers because you never get any calls from them. Do you track how much they're using the software? And they say, some of them say that they don't, and some say that they do. And when it turns out that those customers who have paid for the software are not using it regularly, that suggests that they're not getting value from the thing that they purchased. And that can be a problem, because then when it comes around to the next year, the year after, when I got to build that contract again, if they're not using the software, they say, well, this isn't worth it. Or if the budget comes in and they have to start cutting, where are they going to cut? They're going to ask their people, are you actually using these things? And they're not. And so it's advantageous for us to understand beyond the first purchase, what are people doing with the product, and are they getting value? And are they recognizing the full extent of the value? So when my wife recently bought an automobile, I was really impressed, and I've seen this happen before, where the salesperson says, here's the keys to the car, I'll show you the basics of what you need to do, now go drive it for a couple of weeks, and then come back. And 2 weeks later, you're going to come back, and I'm going to show you how to operate all the bells and whistles. Because I imagine most of us recognize in our automobiles that there are features that we don't know how to work. Right? There's something about how the trunk works, or there's something about how I can double-click the thing and all the windows open, or the lights will come on in some way, or I can start it remotely, but I don't know how to do that. In fact, I'll admit, in my family, we have an automobile that's supposed to park itself. I have no idea how to make that thing do that. It's a huge, we paid extra for it. We paid extra. So I have no idea how to make that thing do its thing. And I'm afraid to, like, it'll crash into something if I do it. So I'm not getting the value from that. The next time I come in to purchase an automobile and they say, here, you can pay extra for this feature, I'll say no, because I'm not getting the value. But if they could work with me to make sure that I'm getting the full value, I might actually see that it's terrific and it does something for me, then that might make it more likely that I'll purchase again. So we think about the way in which we can influence consumers at each of these stages, and one thing that's fairly important is that we understand that even though consumers, and all consumers go through these stages, different consumers will go through these stages differently, and consumers will evaluate things differently, they will take value from the product differently. And so what we want to understand and recognize is just because we understand something about consumers and how they make decisions, and yesterday as we did conjoint analysis, we sort of made an assumption that everyone is more or less the same, and then we took the average of everyone's beliefs and preferences to be able to make some decisions about the products that we would introduce. And today I want to talk about segmentation and targeting, and we'll get into positioning tomorrow as we start to think about how it is that customers are different, how we can discover how they're different, and how we can work with those differences. So that's where we are right now. So let's get going on this. So I will tell you a little story about me. When I was in college, I was a radio station DJ. Do you believe that? And I played, this is in the 1980s, and I played all the new wave hits from the UK and punk rock music on this tiny little radio station that had, I think it was about 87, something like 87 watts. I know it was less than 100, it was very specific, which is like barely more than like the intercom system that goes from like the desk of the executive out to the administrative assistant. It was like really just in the little town of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where we lived. And in fact, it was such a small radio station that before I became a DJ one day, there was a contest. Be caller number 5, and you'll win a pound of candy from the candy people on North Street in downtown Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I called up, and the person answered the phone and said, I'm sorry, you don't win. You were caller number 1. So I called back, and they said, I'm sorry, you don't win. You were caller number 2. And I was all 5 callers. I won the candy, and it made me think I may be the only person listening to this guy. And so that means that when I became the DJ, I may have been just playing music for myself. I don't know if anybody ever listened. So then my goal now, and getting out of this, is that I would like to get back into that business again. I want to be a radio DJ. My plan is, I've noticed around the school and everywhere around the country, there are master's level students who are studying and doing their work, and I would like them to listen to my radio station that is designed for that target audience, which I will point out is a fairly homogeneous audience in terms of age. There's a lot of ages that go down to 0 and up to almost 100 years old, but in terms of age of master's level students, they tend to be fairly tight. In terms of education, they all have at least undergraduate degrees, but they're all in the process of getting graduate education, which means in terms of knowledge and intelligence, they have done well in their undergraduate programs, that they have done well on standardized tests, that if they don't have 6-figure income now, they're probably in the place of having 6-figure income soon. So all of the ways that we might generally describe groups of people might be fairly similar when we talk about master's level students across the country. And yet I recognize that maybe they're not all the same. So what I want to do is I want to find out people's preferences for the kinds of music so that I know what kind of music should I play for this group of people in order to get them to listen to my radio station, because once they do, I now have their ears and I can sell advertising in order to make money, and then I'm in the business of doing what I like to do in addition to being a professor, which I also enjoy doing. So when I think about this, I want to say, well, how am I going to find out? How do I find out what music people like? And one way that I can do this is I can do a survey. I can just ask people about the music that they like. Are there any other methods, though, that I might use before we say survey only? what other methods might I use? Because I want us to recognize that for any research tool that we use, there are choices that we're making. So what else might I do to find out what kind of music I should play?
Find out what other radio stations are successful.
Okay, so finding out what other folks are. So those might likely be the competition. Let's take a look at what's going on right now, what's successful in terms of radio stations, what kind of music do they play. That might be at least a start for what I'm going to do. I could either do the exact same thing and maybe do it cheaper and better, or perhaps maybe I could find a way to be a little bit different. Diego and then Jared.
Secondary research with market reports or consultants that can help you understand what your users listen to.
Okay, so I can go to, I'll come to Jared in a second, let me just build on what Diego says. So I might go to a company like, an outfit like Nielsen, for instance. You've probably heard of Nielsen where they do the television ratings, they understand what programs people watch. There are a number of different companies like that that measure who is listening to different radio stations, and then we can look at the formats that those radio stations have, what kind of music are they playing, and then that might allow me to get an understanding about the types of people, who are the people that listen to different music, what kind of music do people who are master's students tend to listen to. I want to make sure that I play that, and these market reports will be able to tell me something about what it is that folks are listening to, and then might also be able to look at information about downloads on Spotify, for instance, or they might be able to, reports might be able to tell me about, music that people search for on Shazam, for example. Jared, do you want to add something?
I was thinking you could go to look at other places where that cohort congregates, bars or music venues that are like live or like similar, where they can see what kind of music draws them there, or samples them there, or a restaurant they frequent, ambiance music.
That's a great idea. So I'm going to sort of do a little bit of trend spotting, right? I'll watch to see like what's new and what's coming up. What are the kinds of things that are showing up in the bars and in their environment? Maybe I could ask them, take a random sample of people and ask them like, show me your Spotify playlist. What are the ones that you regularly listen to? Vinod?
Yeah. So there are other proxies like which music is in high demand and how. And which ones are being produced a lot more. So those proxies also can be used.
Okay, so I might be able to, and then do you have some thoughts about how I would get that information?
From the manufacturers or demand, other ways of.
Okay, so right, and so maybe that's what I would do. Obviously, there is a benefit for the folks in the music industry to have their music played on radio stations and on the internet. And so they might be willing to tell me about these are the kinds of music that were, at least the things that they're promoting at the moment, and they might have some knowledge about what the industry is like. So that might be another place where I can gather a little bit more information. Jeff?
Just think about it slightly differently. I know we're concerned with the customer and bringing in as many active listeners as we can. But is there also a way of looking at it from if our revenue source is going to be advertisers and getting those ads paying us as the radio station, knowing what advertisers are out there so we can target our audience based on a geographic area where those businesses exist, or
We might do that, or we might start to think about, later on you're going to see how we make choices about which target audience we might choose based on the likely profitability of that target audience. And so you wait, we're gonna get into exactly that. And I like that, Jeff?
Similar to maybe getting the data, but maybe a different take on it is finding another representative community, a representative market that has a similar population and find out what's successful there.
Okay, and so maybe
Like another college town.
right, so I could go to another college town. It would still mean I'm going to have to collect this information with this college town, and so I can either go out and use primary research. That means I'm going to be the one to collect this information. So I could walk around to bus stops and bars and college places and just find out what music is playing. As it turns out, a lot of the music that's played has there's a signal in it that's not audible that allows the pickup of what that song is. And so we could use those tools that allow us to know what the song is. You know that in your automobile there's information that tells you this is what the song is that's playing. Well, that's through part of the signal that does not include the actual music. And that would allow us to find out, so I could go into stores and bars and actually use those tools to be able to gather, find out what song is playing. Ruby and Nadeem.
I think it was utilized a lot before with like small focus groups, where they would invite a couple of, let's say if you're trying to target college kids, you invite a couple of different folks that fit a certain profile, ask them what they listen to, and find out.
So a great idea, right? And especially if I'm in the point of like, I have no idea. I've got no knowledge about this product category at all. I have no idea even what the attribute space is to look at. Qualitative research, like focus groups, like depth interviews, like just observing what it is that people do, can help me build at least the kinds of questions that I might have that I would then use in quantitative research. So should I ask people if they listen to zither music or not? Should I ask people if they listen to harpsichord? Does it make sense to find out what percentage of people listen to harpsichord if in my qualitative research I find out almost nobody listens to such an instrument? Perhaps there's a small target audience that's valuable to go after, but I would have to find out, perhaps from this qualitative research, what are the likely candidates, and then I'll use my quantitative research to follow that up. Nanda and then Richard.
Well, in this example, music is a thing where people can start liking new music. It's not like I'm going to eat the same thing. When you listen to some new music, you're like, you can have new customers or new folks get into that.
So what you're saying is that through time, people's preferences might change?
Yeah, they might change. You might have a new segment that you're not even looking at if you're just looking at it historically.
So I might actually come to, if I do my research, I might find out that there are groups of people out there that I never even realized are out there, and they might have preferences that I never imagined go together, right? So the radio station perhaps that's playing country music might also be the radio station that plays Broadway music. And there's people out there who like both of them, and I might never have realized that these two things go together for a segment of people, and maybe that's something that could be valuable. Richard, do you want to?
I was just going to say as a starting point, maybe just look at the formative years of that age demographic, because that tends to kind of be one of the stickier points, I guess. And if you listen to music that you're growing up with in a certain time frame, it's probably something you'll most likely continue with, and that would give you kind of a direction of where you want to go to.
Okay, and so, I mean, that would require that I'm going to have to either do secondary research, I'll go out and look on historical descriptions of the kind of music that people listen to, or I can do primary research. I can ask people when you were at the age from 14 to 19 years old, what was the kind of music that you tended to listen to, and that might give me information going forward. All right, let me move forward. I will get to questions, but I just want to make sure that we make some progress today. So one of the approaches, again, is we could just use a survey approach. Actually, let me show you this, which is the approach that I took. So here is, I'll make sure this is here, and you have this data available as well if you want to take a look at it. Here is the data that shows people's preferences on a 1 to 9 scale for a variety of different music. So I've got all of these different preferences. And so I've now collected this data. What should I do to get an understanding about what people like and what people don't like? Here's the data. What do I do with it? Yeah, let's start with take the average. Let's find out, because that will tell us something about what this population thinks. So I'm going to do that just so we can take a look at what would happen. So I'm just going to copy this here. I'm going to bring it down to the bottom just so we can play with it a little bit. Make a little space so we can see. A little bigger.
Adjust the lighting so that light is.
Yeah, I'm going to do it because that's annoying, isn't it? Yeah.
It's hard to see.
Okay, so first I'm going to take my average and then I'll adjust the light. Right, so I'm just going to take the average of everybody's preferences for each kind of music. Let me just sweep this across here. And then I'm going to move the lights so that folks can see a little bit better. I can see read.
Thank you.
Is that a little better?
Yeah.
Yes. It's brutal for me too. Okay. All right, so here I have, just for looking at this, which makes sense. Here, let's assume that the folks in the class are a representative sample of the population. I can see right away that there's people, some like things more, some people like things less. If I want to describe what the population thinks about the music, I can take the average of these, and if I take the average, I can then put these on a nice chart so we can take a look at visually what this looks like. Let's put this, I like using this radar chart as a way to think about this. Fun. Right, and so farther from the center, the preference on average is higher. Nearer to the center, the preference is lower. So what does that mean in terms of the kind of music that I should play on this radio station? Right, so it looks like definitely rock, maybe as I come around, maybe hip hop, and maybe rap, maybe not, rhythm and blues, pop, jazz, country, right, and then maybe once in a while 80s new wave music. Terrible.
That's a mix.
And that's what I play. That's a mix. And definitely not, looks like definitely not new age or children's, definitely not Christian, definitely not reggae, definitely not punk. So if you were presented then with this radio station that plays rock, and then it goes to a hip hop song, and then a rap song, and then an R&B song, and then a pop song, then it plays jazz, then it plays country, is this a radio station that you think you might want to listen to? No. Okay, so a lot of people say no.
Jazz one goes up.
Right, and so think about the issue, particularly in this product category, is not only that I want to be sure that I'm playing the music that people like, but I want to avoid, like, how many songs will you put up with that are in a category that you're not interested in before you change the channel? And it's not as though you come back every 10 minutes to check to see is it playing something that I like right now. And so we want to be thoughtful not only about of having the music that people are going to like to draw them in, but also not having the music that people don't like, which might turn them away. And so what do radio stations do right now in order to solve exactly this kind of problem is that they recognize that there are different consumers out there with different preferences. And so if you go to like online the satellite radios that is available for free for 3 months in your car when you buy a new one, and then if you don't purchase it, they just keep giving it to you anyway until they take it away maybe a year and a half later. You'll see that there's a large variety of different formatted radio programs that they have. So even within pop music, there's like 10 different kinds of pop music, and there's all sorts of different kinds of hip hop, and they've got Christian and jazz standards and classical. And so each one of these mixes is meant to be a particular configuration of musical styles that's going to be preferable to a segment of the population. So there's rock and dance and electronic, but even so, the producers of these different segments of music, these different types of stations, they still have to know what kind of music should we put in there and what should be included. And they're bringing together a variety of different products to put into this entire category of music. And the same can be said of a lot of product categories. So we look at like cruises, for example, and the Carnival Corporation owns a variety of different brands of cruises. So they own Carnival, but they also own Cunard and P&O Cruises and Holland America Line. And if you look at each one of these brands of cruises, they offer something different in terms of the style and the price point and the kinds of activities. So has anybody here ever been on a Carnival cruise?
No. Yeah.
So if you, what's it like on a Carnival cruise?
Band-aids in the pool.
I've seen the videos.
So Evan describes it. It's not good. I was going to be careful because you were saying Band-aids in the pool and broken glass, and I'm waiting for, did you have a good time or not? And so for Evan, it was negative. Right?
Evan loved it.
But it's sort of like summer camp. It's crazy summer camp on a boat. There's copious amounts of food, but not necessarily the best quality food. But there's a lot of activity and it's sort of a party atmosphere. There are other cruises where the atmosphere is a lot more about families doing things together, or physical activities. In fact, a lot of what they feature is getting off the ship and getting out there and riding bikes or going and seeing glaciers and doing these sorts of things. And others that are all more focused on sedentary kind of things. I'm just going to lie there and people are going to put hot rocks on my back. There's nothing that's less physically demanding than just lying there when someone puts things. And those are very different, different types of features that they have. And so if we were to create, let's say I wanted to create a cruise vacation for master's level students, what features should we include on the ship, or at least what features should we focus on promoting? And what ones do we not want to talk about? Some people say bars, but I have friends who, for health reasons, don't drink alcohol anymore. I have friends who, for religious reasons, don't drink alcohol. I have friends who, because psychologically they got into trouble with alcohol, and so they don't drink anymore. And so lots of people like bars, but other people, that would be exactly the worst situation for them. So if you look at the cruise industry and the kinds of innovations they have, on different ships they provide a mix of different features and benefits. So Celebrity Cruises have these craft bars and these mixologists on there to make you all kinds of fancy drinks. There's Norwegian's Breakaway Cruise that features Broadway musicals. There are some people who can't wait to see a Broadway musical, and there are some people who are willing to wait outside while somebody else watches the Broadway musical. There's different opinions on that. On Royal Caribbean Quantum of the Seas, it's not enough that you're on a giant ship out in the middle of the ocean. They also want to have the opportunity to do skydiving while they're out there because it's not interesting enough. And so for these folks, that's available. One of these ships, I don't know the name of this ship, has got a go-kart track up on the top, water slide. So what?
Norwegian Bliss.
Yeah, it's Bliss. Oh yeah, it says it right on the ship. Thank you very much, Evan, for bringing. This one's called Icon of the Seas. It almost looks like an artificial intelligence tool was asked to build this thing. And like the clue would be like it's made of shrimp or something, but other than that, so I kind of
Think about that C word.
And here, this one's called Blue Horizon. It's a casino cruise, so like all good casinos, there are no windows. They take you 3 miles out. Leave your guns at the door, and we'll see what happens. They say it's like a trip to Vegas by boat. So that's that one. Oh, and if you like knitting, this is Craft Cruises. It's a knitting cruise.
Ruby.
Oh, and by the way, so you say no, I don't like knitting. Don't worry, because there's also crocheting cruises.
Obviously different.
Perfect, right? So the point is, same product category, but each of the brands, and then even within the brands, each of the ships is offering a different mix of products, and there must be a reason why it is that these firms are offering these different mix of products. And this gets to understanding how customers differ and the mix of products that they might be interested in. So when we talk about the recognition that, like with our music, we just took the survey and we took the average and we found that really nobody was going to be satisfied with what we produced. It's because there are different groups of customers out there that differ in a variety of ways. And so for marketers, what we want to do is we want to think about how do we carve up the market to discover people that differ in meaningful ways. And our reading looks at 3 primary categories, which is really just a way to help us remember what are some of the different ways in which we can think about how customers differ. So part 1 we can sort of think about as asking the question, who? Who are the customers? And so let's describe who potential customers are in the market in terms of their demographics. So what's their age? Are they married? Are they single or not? Are they affluent? Or are they struggling in some way? So we could think about income as a demographic category, level of education, where they are in terms of their families. All of these kinds of things are who questions, and they describe like taking a snapshot, we'll take a picture to describe, and then we can think about if we see that they differ by age, some people are younger and some people are older, we'll carve up the market that way and we'll say, do they also differ on something meaningful for the business? Perhaps the younger people tend to like this kind of music, and the older people tend to like that kind of music, and so maybe we'd be better off targeting younger people or targeting older people. And you can see with the cruise ships, Carnival Cruise is probably more targeting folks who are younger, certainly not, it's less targeting the grandparents of the world and that being their kind of a cruise. There are other cruises that might be more suited for them, or if you look in the hotel industry, has anybody ever been at this place, it's called Moxie? Right, like if you go into Moxie, if I were to take my mother to a place called Moxie, she'd be like, what is going on here? This, you know, it's purple and got neon lights and the rooms are really small. What? It's a hotel chain, yeah, and so we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, we'll look at some hotels. You can see how that they differ from other hotels and they're more geared for different demographics. So that's the Who. And I saw a hand up, I just want to make sure I'm not missing. Over here, yeah.
Is there a reason why where isn't in there, or is that kind of baked into the Who?
We're gonna get, so, oh, well,
Like
there is
where the customers.
like geographic, we can talk, yeah, so geographic is certainly, would fit into there, right? That's something about, we're describing where they live is a discussion of who they are, right? So maybe we could look at, are they tend to be more rural, or they tend to be more urban, or is it, we could just simply say, you know, it's people in the United States versus people in Europe. And that might be important to us as we start to think about how we're going to grow our business. Where is there a target market that's large enough that it's worth going after, that we have the ability to go after them, that we might start to think about the fact that they're going to last in terms of their, how do I put this? They're durable is sort of the word that I want to use, that segment doesn't just exist for a moment, but that they're going to continue to be able to purchase from us again and again. And so we might look at different geographic regions and decide it makes sense that we're going to expand into, I don't know, Belgium or France or something before we do our expansion into the Nordic countries, because there's something about them that differ from us. So geographic makes perfect sense. So then, once we've answered sort of the who questions, we're going to answer the what questions. Now, what, I like that this reading sort of helps us remember who, what, and why. The trouble with the what question is it doesn't really describe anything about what we're asking, because what is what have the customers done. So it's really, you can sort of think about the who question as demographic snapshots, take a picture of what do they look like. And the what question is really all about behavior. Right, so what have customers done? Have they purchased in my products, in the product category or not? Right, and then you can see why for cruises this might be important. There are the people who have been on cruises before versus the people who have never been on a cruise. And the way in which we might price, the way in which we might promote, the kinds of features that we might provide might be very different if we're trying to acquire customers who have never ever been on a cruise before than if we're trying to acquire customers who maybe they went on a Carnival cruise, but they didn't have such a good time, but we have a similar product where they are going to have a good time, and we'll be able to describe for them why it's different from other cruises might be more important in our promotional materials for someone who's already been in the product category. Where folks who have never been on a cruise, I need to tell you why it's better than other vacation options. So as I start to think about how I will ultimately position what it is that I'm offering can differ depending upon an understanding about the behavior of those consumers in the past. Were you in the category or not? And then I can ask also in terms of behavior, have they purchased from me or only the competition in the past? So there's the behavior of being in the category versus the behavior of having been one of my customers. So as I start to think about a strategy of retention, how do I make sure that they come back again? So what does Acura do to help Nicola, right? You have the Acura, right? What do they do to help Nicola come back and buy an Acura again and again? That's very different from if Nicola had been a Lexus owner and we're gonna get them to go from buying the Lexus to buying the Acura, the information that I have to provide is very different. The fact that I changed up the model significantly, let's say that there's real differences in terms of the feel inside the automobile and where the switches and the buttons and all these sorts of things are, that might not be as big of a deal if I'm trying to get you from buying a Lexus into buying the Acura, because we know it's going to be new anyway, and so we just have to tell you why these features are where they are. That could be a problem if I'm trying to retain a customer like Nicolo who says, look, I've been buying this vehicle for years, I suddenly get into it and it's like I'm in a foreign country altogether. This doesn't make any sense to me. And so the way in which I communicate might be different. So I start to think about what have the customers done in terms of, have they purchased in the product category or not? Have they purchased from my brand or not? And then I can also ask questions about how frequently they purchase, how much they purchase, and I might segment that way. So maybe I'm going to go for a target group of customers who are highly frequent purchasers. That might be very different from the people who don't purchase as often. And the programs that I set up, the products that I offer, the features and benefits that I offer can differ. So there's who are the customers, what are those customers' behaviors, and then finally, why are the customers doing what they're doing? And so these kinds of questions are about people's preferences, people's values, people's attitudes, their opinions. Yes, Vinay?
Yeah, so with the segmentation, how do you determine if you are segmenting too much versus what is the optimum?
So when we start to, once we have carved up the market, we then, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about this later, we'll come back to it, but the question then is, I sort of think about this as cutting up a pizza, and I'm kind of deciding how I'm going to cut it. Am I going to cut it into 13 slices or 15 slices or 20 slices, and I'm going to cut it, maybe I can cut it into squares, and there's a variety of ways I can carve it up. But I still have not decided which piece of pizza I'm going to select. And so now I've got to think about what makes sense for me in selecting a piece of pizza. I'm going to look at those pieces of pizza, and you can say, well, how would I choose it? Is it going to be big enough? Does it have enough crust? Does it have enough sauce? So I use criteria to decide. From the business perspective, I'm going to look to say, is it large enough that it makes sense to go after? Does my business have the ability, so is it actionable? Can my business go after this? Do I have the skills to be able to get there? So if I wanted to Randy's point, if I sort of think geographically, I've segmented, I recognize that there's a potential segment, a very large segment of customers in Europe. But I'm a small company with a very small sales force. I don't have the resources, at least at the moment, to be able to send my sales force out to be doing all its work in Europe when my customers are over here. So I might, even though there's a potential segment out there that looks good in terms of the size, it's not actionable for my company. And so I might not do that, maybe not now. I'm going to think of a different strategy and I'll go after other segments, maybe those that are tangential in terms of the locations, the places where I already am, as I expand my market in that way. So I'll look at those segments and we can sort of think about this as going into the haberdashery. You know what I mean?
You basically would be ranking based on how much ROI you're going to get out of the money you're spending.
I would look at the profitability, but I'm also going to look at, right, I might be able to identify a segment that could be very profitable. But the way that it's going to be very profitable is I'm going to have to sell high volume, low margin into this very profitable segment. And in order to do that, I look to my folks, my operations folks in the factory, and I say, can you produce 10 million units? And they say, well, not with this factory. We can't, even in all the time in the world, we can only produce 8 million at full operation. And so then we say, well, what can we do? Let's build an expansion to our factory. Now I go back and think about my company, and I say, well, do I have the assets in order to just do that? No. So now I've got to go to my finance people and say, what's it going to cost us in order to get the resources to be able to build the expansion so we can go after this particular market? And they give it to them and we say, well, that seems really possible. It looks like it's good. But you know what? Nobody is serving those customers over there. Is it possible that there's competition that once we launch, we think we're going to be profitable at X, but there's 3 other companies that are going to come in and split that, and then we might not be. So the ROI is important. We do want to think about what the return is on it, but we also then want to think strategically, are we the ones who are able to capture that based on what we know about our own business? Are there contextual things that could change? So for example, if the war starts up in this country again, that means that the raw materials, whether the cobalt or whatever it is that we need, is going to become more expensive, or coffee is going to become more expensive. So we want to think about those contextual things. We want to think about what the competition is likely to do. Think about the collaborators in terms of the availability of resources. So for example, Whole Foods announced at one point, they said, in order to target consumers who are more interested in natural and organic chickens, they said, we are only going to sell chickens at Whole Foods that meet certain organic standards. And that made sense in terms of going after the customers, and then they turned to the farmers and they said, okay, send us the organic chickens. And the farmers went, what? We don't grow our chickens that way. We could grow our chickens that way, but it's going to take us X number of years to move through these kind of things and grow the chickens in an entirely different way. So we've got to look to the collaborators to be able to be sure that we're going to be able to get the volumes of the resources that we need. So the way that we can think about this is we've carved up the market, and then we can imagine as though we walked into the haberdashery. We're going to try on, we're going to try on hats. We think about each one of the segments that we've carved and say, well, let's try this out. Does it fit? Does it fit in terms of potential profitability? Does it fit in terms of what my company is able to do? Does it fit with the rest of my marketing strategy that I'm already doing now in the business? So I've got customers who know me as being a car that's safe and reliable, but also with the right amount of style. And then if Acura suddenly launches a really low-end cheap car that's, looks like one of those Suzuki automobiles, then maybe there's profit, but that might damage the business that we already have with other folks. So we want to think about the strategy that we already have. So all of these things will help us decide, does the hat fit? And then we'll move from there. So nice question. Save me half an hour tomorrow. Okay, so as we think about the basis for segmentation, these are the things that we can look at. From a business to consumer, we might think about geographic, demographic. Those tend to be more of the who questions. We can also think about psychographic. And the benefits sought, those tend to be more of the why questions. And then the behavioral, the usage, the frequency, the recency, those tend to be the what questions, what are the customers doing? And I'll also point out in business to business, the same is true, we just might use slightly different levels. So geographic expansion, do we go in the country, in a state, in a region? We can look at it rather than demographics. We describe the firms, that's firmographic. So what industry are they in? What size are they? Are they public? Are they private? Maybe there's something about the behaviors and the way in which they buy. So are they centralized? Are they team-based? That is important because maybe the way in which my sales force is set up, we have particular skills to be able to send out a team of people. So I've got the salesperson that meets with the CEO or whoever the manager is who's making the decision, and I've got other salespeople that are more technically oriented that are going to meet with the folks that are important in terms of implementation and installing whatever it is that I'm offering to those businesses. And depending upon how that firm buys, it might fit better with the way in which my structure is. I can also think about behavioral differences in firms. So what volume do they purchase at? There's the large firms and the small firms in terms of how much they purchase, or how frequently, or what the risk preferences are. All of these things might differ in terms of what the companies that might be purchasing value. And if I recognize that, then maybe I'm going to produce something that's fitting one of those segments rather than trying to be all things to all of them. So as we think about the value of segmentation, we can think about segmentation being beneficial to the firm, but also being beneficial to the customer. And so can folks think of what are some reasons why is segmentation valuable to customers? Why are, as consumers, why are you glad that firms segmented? Yeah, Jared.
I mean, it makes it more convenient, reduces the choices you have to make.
Okay, so, right, so add some convenience, so for a consumer, maybe I don't have to make as many trade-offs, right, because I'm gonna get the things that better match my preferences. Let's see, Sebastian, you've not said much today.
Relevancy, so like, I wanna see the things that I wanna see in terms of the product that I want marketed to me.
So yeah, so you're more likely to get relevant advertising, relevant communications. Any other reasons why so I mean, sort of think about when you get home, about when you go home from this trip, you're gonna open up your mail, and there's gonna be tons of junk mail in there, right? And you're just gonna throw that right into the recycling bin. That's wasteful. You'd be better off getting things that are relevant to you. Let's see, who else had a hand up here? Richard?
Even beyond that, I think when people get marketed to a lot of times and it's not something that fits them, they get really upset, potentially.
They get, like, it's irritating.
Like, they get really mad. Like, we've gotten phone calls like, why are you sending me this? Take me off your list, I don't want this. People become really aggressive just from randomly, like direct mail, for example. If they receive something that doesn't like, is something they think they want or need.
It can be frustrating to consumers, and so you sort of have both sides. Where consumers are happier when I get the advertising that I want right at the time that I want it, and it's so if you go on vacation, you're on a beach, and that airplane comes over, and it's like all you can eat buffet, and you're like, if you're looking for a place to eat, you're like, actually, I'm glad that that thing flew by. But most of the time, you're like, come on, the beach is supposed to be quiet, and this drone of this airplane going overhead. Nanda, and then Nicole.
I mean, it's also the method of communication, like showing an ad, that's up to me to look at it. But like how Richard is saying, they're pushy folks who send emails, letters, and you gotta understand your clientele, like, just because you're working from home, you're in the house, can't knock on the door and be like talking to people all the time. It's how you interact. Are you proactively touchy and interacting, or are you just giving glimpses where I can choose to see it?
And so perhaps as a consumer, you're happier that they have recognized I'm just not interested. It's just not for me. That makes it better. But if you are interested, then you're also more pleased that they have focused on it.
There's a difference between airing a TV commercial where I choose to see versus somebody knocking on your door and talking to you.
Right, but with the questions like why does segmentation, the fact so is from the company what they've done is they have recognized that you're somebody who's not going to be annoyed by having a knock on the door because you come at exactly the right time. So let's say, I'm going to go to an extreme. There's been a natural disaster, there has been flooding.
Yes.
And during the pandemic when we had the ice storm that happened that came here through Austin, tons of us lost electricity, we lost water, and there were pipes that were burst all over, and you could not get a plumber. And if at that moment a plumber had knocked on my door and said, we can shut off your water heater, I would have been like, yes, I'm so glad that you recognize that my neighborhood was one that suffered from this. So I can push you to an extreme at a place where you're going to want to get that knock at the door. There are some places, but most of the time that you don't. And so the fact that the firm is engaged in some kind of segmentation to recognize there are customers that are like Nanda, who simply are not going to react positively to this knock on the door. And so let's make sure that we don't do that. That will be better for him, and probably it will also be better for the company.
Benefit to me is I'm more satisfied because I'm getting what I actually want, and I'm paying for what I want and not for features that I don't want.
So you end up not paying for things that you don't need, and you can sort of think, as a result of segmentation, there's not just one cruise. There's all these different types of cruises out there. I can choose the one that's right for me, and then it better matches what my preferences are. So from the perspective of the consumer, there's all these benefits. Why is it beneficial to firms?
Less money, you get to focus your costs. Yeah.
So I can be more efficient with the marketing dollars that I have. I'm not trying to be everything to everyone. Jim?
You can better track your penetration into those accounts well and what's working and what's not working.
So I suppose, yeah, that because you have segmented, you recognize a particular target, you then would be better able to spend your time measuring whether you've been successful there. I like that. Yeah, Kirk?
You can be more focused as in
organization or firm. So, right, so it allows the firm to focus more. In fact, perhaps the fact that we bothered to try to segment the market, we may even discover, where we would not have discovered otherwise, that there's a group of people that we never even, or a group of businesses we never even thought of, that are out there waiting until we get some kind of service. So as we think about the benefits to the customer, it means more tailored products and services, we get more relevant offers, the experience can be more personalized, and as Jared said, it's more convenient. From the firm's perspective, the firm can find opportunities that they might not otherwise be aware of. It allows them to respond to heterogeneity differences in the consumers. If they're better able to allocate their resources, so we're going to spend money on the things that are more likely to allow us to extract profits, and so we can be more efficient. So every dollar that we spend on designing a new product is appreciated by those customers who are willing to pay more for it, so we can bring in more return on that. Every dollar that we spend on marketing advertising is advertising that is reaching the customers that are likely to engage with us. Every dollar that we spend on reducing the price is reducing the price for customers who would otherwise not purchase it unless the price were lower. So everything that we do can be more efficient if we have first engaged in segmentation. Let me just pause. I saw a couple hands come up. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody.
Okay. Just real quick, how is it time savings for the customer? I'm sorry, the consumer?
So how might it save them time? So if I have properly segmented the market, I can give you the choices of the things that it is that you want. If I have advertised to you because of the preferences that you have, that means that you don't have to go out and search to find out whether or not the products that are available are going to meet your needs. So it's better for you in that. So let me show an example. Let's bring our sauce, right? So I'm gonna show you a short clip from this is Malcolm Gladwell. He was giving a TED talk. If you don't know Malcolm Gladwell, he used to be a science writer. I think sometimes he's still a science writer for New Yorker magazine, but also then went on to write a number of books, including The Tipping Point and Blink, and Talking to Strangers more recently, Revenge of the Tipping Point, where basically he says everything I told you about the tipping point is not true. It's good, like you stay around as an author long enough to say, here's all the things, and then you later on come back and say, here's all the things that aren't those things. But nonetheless, this is a nice thing that's going to hint at segmentation. We'll take a quick break. We're going to come back and then we'll do some fun analysis for this. So let's get this to play.
And that's where we got Zesty Pickles. Then the next person came to him, and that was Campbell's Soup. And this was even more important. In fact, Campbell's Soup is where Howard made his reputation. Campbell's made Prego, and Prego in the early 80s was struggling next to Ragu, which was the dominant spaghetti sauce of the 70s and 80s. Now, in the industry, I don't know whether you care about this or how much time I have to go into this, but it was, technically speaking, this is an aside, Prego is a better tomato sauce than Ragu. The quality of the tomato paste is much better. The spice mix is far superior. It adheres to the pasta in a much more pleasing way. In fact, they would do the famous bowl test back in the 70s with Ragu and Prego. You'd have a plate of spaghetti and you would pour it on, right? And the Ragu would all go to the bottom and the Prego would sit on top. That's called adherence. And anyway, despite the fact that they were far superior in adherence and the quality of their tomato paste, Prego was struggling. So they came to Howard and they said, fix us. And Howard looked at their product line and he said, what you have is a dead potatoes society, a dead tomatoes society. So he said, this is what I want to do. And he got together with the Campbell's Soup Kitchen and he made 45 varieties of spaghetti sauce. And he varied them according to every conceivable way that you can vary tomato sauce. By sweetness, by level of garlic, by tartness, by sourness, by tomatoiness, by visible solids, my favorite term in the spaghetti sauce business. Every conceivable way you can vary spaghetti sauce, he varied spaghetti sauce. And then he took this whole raft of 45 spaghetti sauces and he went on the road. He went to New York, he went to Chicago, he went to Jacksonville, he went to Los Angeles. And he brought in people by the truckload into big halls. And he sat them down for 2 hours and he gave them over the course of that 2 hours 10 bowls. 10 small bowls of pasta with a different spaghetti sauce on each one. And after they ate each bowl, they had to rate from 0 to 100 how good they thought the spaghetti sauce was. At the end of that process, after doing it for months and months, he had a mountain of data about how the American people feel about spaghetti sauce. And then he analyzed the data. Now, did he look for the most popular brand variety of spaghetti sauce? No. Howard doesn't believe that there is such a thing. Instead, he looked at the data and he said, let's see if we can group all these different data points into clusters. Let's see if they congregate around certain ideas. And sure enough, if you sit down and you analyze all this data on spaghetti sauce, you realize that all Americans fall into one of three groups. There are people who like their spaghetti sauce plain, there are people who like their spaghetti sauce spicy, and there are people who like it extra chunky. And of those three facts, the third one was the most significant, because at the time, in the early 1980s, if you went to a supermarket, you would not find extra chunky spaghetti sauce. And Prego turned to Howard and they said, are you telling me that 1/3 of Americans crave extra chunky spaghetti sauce, and yet no one is servicing their needs? And he said, yes. And Prego then went back and completely reformulated their spaghetti sauce and came out with a line of extra chunky that immediately and completely took over the spaghetti sauce business in this country. And over the next 10 years, they made $600 million off their line of extra chunky sauces. And everyone else in the industry looked at what Howard had done and they said, oh my God, we've been thinking all wrong. And that's when you started to get 7 different kinds of vinegar and 14 different kinds of mustard and 71 different kinds of olive oil and then eventually even ragu hired Howard. And Howard did the exact same thing for ragu that he did for Prego. And today, if you go to the supermarket, a really good one, and you look at how many ragus there are, do you know how many there are? 36. In 6 varieties. Cheese, light, robusto, rich and hearty, old world traditional, extra chunky garden. That's Howard's doing. That is Howard's gift to the American people. Now, why is that important?
Okay, so we'll pause here. I just want to point out one of the things that he said, right in the middle of it, he said something about looking at people's preferences for these different kinds of tomato sauce. Finding that there were, he did like this, he said there were clusters of people that differed in terms of their preferences. And so we're going to take a break, we'll come back, Brandon, 15 minutes, right? So 5, 10, 15, 25 past 9. And then we're going to look back at that data again that we looked at before where we saw average preference where no one was happy. And we're going to think about some of the statistical tools that we can use in order to find clusters of individuals in our sample that are similar within those clusters, and that the clusters are meaningfully different from one another. And then we can look at those clusters and make some decisions about which one of those possible segments that we want to go after. So take 15 minutes, we'll come back and we'll look at some data.
I think you can. They yeah, dude.
Jerome Powell's gonna present.
Fashion and video. It's all there. Well, sun is really technical.
I don't wanna make it right after there.
But it was like I review whatever he's that guy who plays like two different things, like piano in one hand.
And then the drums, and then has some.
Yeah, exactly.
Because all the work doesn't fit on one computer, is that what you're saying?
It's pretty good. Computers are fast enough for him. Are you a Malcolm Gladwell reader?
Yeah, I read a lot of his. I like that. In fact, in the book, The Tipping Point, he describes this notion of something called a market maven, which is a person who knows a lot about product categories, not because they're purchasing, but they're highly involved just because they just like to know things. Like a person who knows where to get the best ham in town, even though they're Jewish and eat kosher, just because they they love to just know things. And it turns out the notion of this thing, the market maven, came from a dissertation that was done here at the University of Texas.
Oh.
And one of my advisors, his name is Mark Alper, was the model for this idea of the market maven. So he's a fellow that is one of the marketing professors that's here. So he shows up quite a bit in company levels.
I think there are like certain categories where like, I don't know if it's a hobby or like I try to keep up with electronics, even though like let's say I'm not buying anything for the next few years. But I still want to know like what's out there, what it's, you know, offering, what has changed. So
Yeah, so in the research world, we would refer to that as enduring involvement, right? So if you're involved in the product category, people who want to buy new electronics, it's situational, right? So I'm going to go and look at all these sorts of things to find out what's the best computer, which one's then after that, I don't bother looking. But you're curious about the category, you just like to know about it. What's the industry doing, what's being produced, and so you maintain that.
Yeah, like for cell phones, I am that way. Like refrigerator, I had to recently buy one. So I did the research till the point I got one, and then I forgot about it. I don't need to keep searching for it continuously.
Right.
But yeah, I think for cell phones, electronic, I have that.
So you like to learn about what's new in cell phones?
Cell phones, tablets, and stuff.
So you might be one of the people when they say that someone left a prototype in a hotel and now we've got a whole description of it. That's the kind of thing you say.
Yeah, like
See, that's
so like a lot of times these companies they, so Samsung has a habit of sharing like prototypes of their phones, like they're blank hollow phones, but they give it to the case manufacturers before launch to show like how it looks like because they can like make cases for them.
Because we want the cases ready.
Exactly. So then like a lot of kind of thing kind of comes up like interest, PKs around that, like especially around like the foldable phones that are hitting the market. So, yeah, it's one of those things.
Very interesting, right? I mean, I suppose it's valuable for competitors, but there's also consumers that get excited.
Yeah, yeah. I think these marketing segments, like I think I was going through the slides, like I work for a bank and one of the things I look into is just like digital acquisitions. There are a lot of variables which we are not allowed to touch, like age, demographics and stuff. And we tried using like alibis or like substitution variables which will highly correlate to like a person's learning potential and stuff, so we can
And that's because either legally or morally the bank doesn't allow you to segment the market based on certain characteristics.
That's correct. That's correct. It's a protected category. The government doesn't allow it, and now they're also kind of testing our targeting models is that like you cannot be heavily influenced on that one model, which could be a substitute or an alibi for a.
Got it, right, so that's sort of the, akin to the, disparate outcome as opposed to disparate.
Exactly,
treatment.
yeah.
Got it.
So that's also like they found that, okay, this is basically another like a workaround that you guys are doing. So now it leaves us with very, very few things that the customers touch points, like compare that to Amazon, which they can like process tons and tons of consumer preferences to give them a right product, like banking and things like it as a local play.
You know, there's things that you can do about, like, for example, years ago, the banks were able to segment special products for different goals. So many years ago, we'd have these holiday savings accounts, for instance, right? Which was like, here, you can put your money into this account, it gets worse interest, but you take it all out at the end of the year, you use it to save
Okay,
for
it's like
gifts.
a kind of a CD, right? Like a limited.
It was even worse than that, it's just like, there was a savings account that was like apportioned off, it was called a Christmas savings account or something, like, you just save for the holiday gifts. You put a little bit of money in that way, when the holidays come, you could then take all the money out of it, and it allowed for a little mental accounting for the consumer to say, well, here, self-fungible, but they say, this is holiday money, this is not. And so that was sort of based on goals that customers had. Many people not interested in that, but others
I think
are.
many of the customers I was surprised, like, they didn't have that much financial literacy or even awareness to account for savings that way, right? Like, Citi has like close to 100 million customers, like credit cards and bank and everything together, but customers don't save up. They don't even realize at times that they have like a 30% APR and they're paying minimum payments.
Oh, under the loans or.
On their loans and like credit cards and like minimum payment they're making.
What is the, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think financial literacy would be the best thing that you can market to these kind of customers. That will kind of like, I think one is like customer segment based and then it's like a need based. Like the sauce is like, okay, it's my preference to have like basil or onion and garlic, but then like they need something to have it.
But I wonder if there's like, opportunity for, certainly the credit cards have done this. There's not really a big difference between the MasterCard and Visa, American Express, a little bit in terms of, availability, Discover, but the way in which they present and position the product, the one is more associated with personal success.
Yeah.
The other is about convenience.
Yeah.
So these are different goals and values that people have that they say, well, the Visa card it's quick and easy, right? And it's ubiquitous. The American Express.
I think it's been done that. I think it's just like the variety. Like there's so many banks and everyone has their own kind of like what we call as value cards, and then there's like luxury cards, so to speak. So everyone's kind of popular. So how do you?
So now we can segment it, but everyone else is segmenting in the exact same way.
Exactly.
So we're not differentiating.
So it's just the same set of variables that you work on, and then it becomes basically from an SEO point like who bids the highest, or like in affiliates with things like Red Card and NerdWallet, like who pays the highest affiliate traffic to get to your bank services. So that's
rough, right?
That's very rough. Like it's like a very small playing field.
So like,
everyone's
there's no
like
way for us to
And is your goal that you're trying to get people to be to take
And
loans,
after that,
or you want people to savings, do you segment the same way for both of
just so we
them?
know.
Yeah, loans less.
I don't know how many alumni showed up.
I think loans is something we want for existing customers when we have their data. It's like you're a credit card customer, we get it through the door. Based on your application, will like have your details, your FICO scores and stuff. So then you can run like a number of models on segmentation. Like we don't want to give loans to everyone. Like what the ones who deserve it, like you feel will pay us back. Then you kind of market the personal.
That's much more of a retention-based strategy.
Retention and like upsell.
And it's an upsell.
Yeah, upsell process. But I think credit card is like the foot in the door.
So potentially you don't have to make as much profit on that credit card.
Yeah, credit cards break even after like 3 years. Like because you always have like a sign-up bonus, like a 0% fee or something. So most of the credit cards are break even after
3 years of use.
3 years of regular use.
You know what your churn rate is in credit cards? We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, so they're private label cards, they have a churn rate of 20%, it's very high.
Okay.
Private label is like Home Depot, private label card with City offers.
Actually, 20 doesn't seem as high as I would have thought, because I can
Yeah.
imagine like, so many people get the card, they use it
Yeah.
twice, and then they just.
Yeah, I think by churn rate you mean like actual customers closing the account or like just becoming dormant or inactive?
Becoming dormant.
Yeah, I think that's much higher, that's I think 60%. 60% of the customers on private label they just become inactive. Yeah, so then there are reactivation campaigns for them. Actual account closures is 20% is also very high. On branded cards, like your over everyday cards with Citi, that's like around 30%.
Yeah, I don't want to know.
Because like customers keep jumping from one
That's right.
kind of offer to the next.
Yeah,
Very few customers again like know that okay, I should not open a lot of credit cards. I don't wanna like engage my credit by they kind of stick with
So 2 or 3 cards in the wallet.
yeah. Yeah, thank you for sure. Yeah.
I'm taking Marcy's first. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna use our if it's good, cute. We will copy used. I'm telling actually about the best.
Oh.
Run it on the natural.
Right, right. That's a lot, dude.
What was that speaking?
Toronto. T-R-O-N-A.
So, you gotta make a reservation.
It's on, it's a Japanese whiskey.
Waiting on an offer.
You wait, maybe we'll go out.
Easy one.
I learned almost, especially when you.
I did.
Really important what's on the slides. And understand why you went from one to the next. It's hard, so how does it all solve for? Why do you think you? Alright, next is quantitative.
I like when you made the spider a brown.
That's better.
Yeah, it's actually.
My favorite.
But it's hard to then compare two going off in different directions. If you do it
The people that are survey.
that radar chart isn't very good.
No.
Yeah.
Is this one higher than that? It's hard to see. But it's the ones that 14 is only all the price.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
You ever seen the,
Let's give it a shot.
Christensen, it's higher products.
What do they do?
He does this like.
Buying pools rather than buying.
Behind the,
And so it was the research behind it, actually. I was doing some research. I was looking at the book, it's just my bag. It breaks down how they did all this kind of
Yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering how many midnight would actually show up. So far, there's been a trend.
It's funny, there's like money sitting in the.
Also, those guys,
All you do.
it resulted in the evening MBS from Dallas and
No, I know.
so at least those ones were.
Yeah, exactly.
Evening
It's a really funny video, and like,
Yeah, yeah. One of my weaknesses. Those guys are much.
Yeah. How was it last time, actually? Outbound.
I want to get some of
It's so easy.
Now you realize.
I had a big hospital while in
Yes, sir. Yeah, next door.
I think there's a wide range of
Yeah, my parents got that.
Please, just a lot of.
Yeah, it was like.
And a lot of companies.
My given name.
I think there is those.
Oh, I just saw somebody else. The other day, my friend was greatest
Yesterday.
Okay, so, folks, let's get started again. So this is the part we're gonna play with a little data. Partly just for the purpose of exposure to some of the methods for almost any quantitative method that we show in this class. Choices have been made. I'm showing you one version. There are other ways in which we can collect the same kind of data. Each method that we use helps us reduce uncertainty. All methods have flaws and problems with them. All methods have benefits. We are going to talk about a method for finding groups of consumers who are similar to one another, so they all fall into the same bucket, and who are meaningfully different between the buckets. That's what our goal is. Because when we first did this analysis with our data, we came up with an average, and we said, here's the music that we are going to play, and here's the music that we aren't going to play. And most people groaned and said, no, that's not going to be good for me. So I want to find ways to discriminate so that we're not just doing the average. Let's see if there are people that differ from one another. So as I do this, I also want to know what makes them similar. And then later, I think it was Bernard who was asking this question. Later we're going to go back and we're going to say, well, just because we have identified the segment, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will target that segment. Then we're going to take a look at that segment and say, are they likely to be profitable for me? Are they likely to not have an issue with the competition? Are there contextual things that might be happening that might make it more difficult in order to serve them? So we'll go back and we'll look and we'll see if they make sense. And so there's a variety of tools that we can use in order to find these segments.
So can I ask a question about the video that we were just watching?
Sure, and then we'll come back to this, yeah.
So two ways, right? One is you create your segments, you target
who your consumers are and you create a product that meets that segment, right? That's one way. In that video, he basically created like 50 different varieties of the pasta sauce. And then he identified that the majority are seeking the one with the chunks, right? That's what that is. I'm trying to
He
see
found
how-
that there was a sizable percentage of people, not the majority, but a sizable percentage of people that wanted chunky, and there was no chunky in the market.
But that's not segmentation, right? He created 50 varieties of the same product, and then how do you see that? Like, is that segmentation?
So, in a way, I'm not sure exactly what the process was, but what he did was two things. One is it sounds like he did something very similar to a conjoint analysis, right? So they created profiles of different tomato sauces, and rather than just asking people to rate them on paper, let people actually try them and taste what they were, and then we can go back and analyze and find out what are the characteristics of the sauces that like people like them more or less. But then what he did was he didn't take the averages. He looked across all of the individuals and he said, are there people that cluster together? So we were able to find that there are groups of people that tend to like sauce that's like this. There's an entirely separate group of people that like sauce like this. And then they discovered, and had they not done this model where they tried carving them up into differences, we wouldn't have discovered that there's this group of people that like chunky at all. So that's what it is that he's claiming that they found. And it's what he argues has led to a proliferation of SKUs, stock keeping units in grocery stores, where brands provide a variety of different products to consumers. When we're better able to match those consumers' preferences, typically consumers are going to be less price sensitive because we get more benefit out of the thing. We're not paying for the things that we don't want. And so that means on each product, our margins can be higher for those individual products, and that might allow us to extract more funds. And in fact, it's a mechanism, in a way, a mechanism for price discrimination, so that I can charge, in fact, different prices to different consumers without having the consumers who would otherwise pay more run downhill and be able to buy it for the lower price. I'm only going to put the chunks in some of the sauces and not in the others. I can now charge more for the chunky sauce to the person who's willing to pay for it. I can still sell the cheaper sauce for people who are more price sensitive. Will the chunky people run downhill and buy it for the lower price? No, because they're willing to pay more for the other sauce. So one of the ways in which we can price discriminate is through what we refer to as a product line sort. So we're going to provide different versions of the products. We let people raise their hand and say, this is the one that I want. When I go to buy an iPhone, I can buy the iPhone that has a ton of memory, the one that has a little bit less memory, and the one that has almost no memory. The most price-sensitive customer would love to have lots of memory, but it's not as important to them. The least price-sensitive customer is also the customer who values the memory. And so I'm sure that customer would prefer to buy the phone for a lower price, but they won't do it because they're willing to pay more for the memory. But we have to know ahead of time that memory is a factor on which customers differ in terms of their importance, and then we correlate that with their price sensitivity. It allows us to create versions of products. So maybe that was a little longer answer than you wanted, but that's where we'll get to. Was there other questions? Oh yeah.
Not a question, just a thought. Since you brought this tomato sauce example, right? There are two sides. One manufacturing side, the other is retail side. The retail side in the sense store. How they will segment the customers by procuring, the volume of most wanted item to the least wanted. So even though they supply like 50 different variants of the sauce, they don't need to keep all those 50 variants in their shop.
Correct.
Only they'll keep the most wanted items, and meaning in a bulk quantity, and keep very minimal quantity on the least wanted items, even though there are 50 variants.
That's right. And so
the segmentation thing has to be happen on
you're
both
right.
sides.
I like this. It's sort of an interesting. So the manufacturer has to segment and provide products to meet the needs of those different segments. But in many ways, we can think of retailers as being like agents who are going to select a variety of products to carry in their stores in order to market or merchandise for a particular segment of customers. So we can look at stores like Walmart versus stores like Target. So here's two big retailers that sell many, many of the same products. But in some respects, they're targeting slightly different customers with a slightly different mix of products. And so when I go to Target, I have certain expectations about what it is that Target is going to offer me in terms of products. I'm going to get value for what I purchase, at least I expect to when I go into Target, but I might not necessarily be able to find at Target the very least expensive versions of products, because I don't, maybe that's not necessarily there, where I might be more likely to expect to find that at Walmart, which when you look at how they promote and what it is that they're all about, or at least for many years they've been about, being able to provide low prices. Like that's their thing, it's all about providing low prices. Target doesn't go into the market and say we provide the lowest prices, they say we provide value, which is a different place on that curve where the trade-off for the amount that I spend for the whatever the features, the benefits that I get are slightly different. And then I can go to other retailers that might have more upscale versions of products that are out there. And so those retailers are then in part the activity of promoting those products, right? So they want to sell the products because they're going to take some profit from them. And they will themselves be targeting particular consumers. So where does Target decide to locate its stores relative to where Walmart decides to locate its stores? That's a distribution decision based on expectations about how those customers exist in different places. And that's a geographic decision, right? So as Randy was saying, so we think about geographic, when we think about who are those customers, those different retailers will do different things. And then the product that they offer, that's the mix of products that they offer in the store, also a decision that they make, acting in order to provide what it is that those customers want. Does that sort of answer your question? How that is? Yeah, nice one. Okay, let's play with data because that's geeky, more fun. I just want to say, variety of different tools to do similar stuff to what we're going to do today. We're going to look at one tool, cluster analysis. There are other tools that are similar. So cluster analysis is going to help us group objects. Doesn't have to be, but generally we use it for grouping objects. Factor analysis is another tool that is similar. It's a grouping tool which is more typically used for grouping variables that share variance. There's multidimensional scaling. We'll be doing a little bit of that tomorrow when we do product positioning. There's discriminant analysis, there's CHAID, there's CART. These are a variety of different statistical tools. I just want you to know we're only looking at one. It's not the only one, so just be aware that there's others. And then even within the tool, we make choices. There's a little bit of art and a little bit of science. We can choose the version of cluster analysis. So we're going to be looking at one called agglomerative hierarchical cluster analysis. There are others, there's a k-means clustering, there's a variety of other tools. And then even within the tool, we can also make choices. And so you can sort of think about it as a workshop full of tools. And today we're only using the handsaw. So just be aware that there are lots of ways to cut things and there's lots of ways to use them. So just so you know, that's what we're going to do. So I want to think about the kind of music that I want to play. We talked about some ways that I might be able to find out. I need to understand what people's preferences are, and I recognize that it's likely that people's preferences differ from one another. One method that I could actually do this is I could just ask people directly, here's a radio station, would you be happy? Let me move this forward. Stay here. So I could just ask people, you tell me which kind of music lover you are. So what kind of music do you like? College alternative, or R&B, or jazz and martinis, or are you headbanger, or punker, or slacker, or quartet and symphony, or Swiftie, or love songs, nothing but love songs. We can use methods by just asking people, where do you belong, and have people check that off, or rate where they belong. The customers themselves might not know where they belong, they might not know what music it is, and it assumes a priori, before we get started, that I know what the possible music segments are. I know what goes together. So if I were to say love songs, nothing but love songs, what kind of music do I play? What's the tempo? What's the kind of things are said in those songs? I have to know that those already exist. It's possible that there are segments out there that I'm not aware of. There might be some segment of consumers who likes punk rock music, maybe not, but there could, yeah, actually, I bet that there is, I don't know how sizable it is, the people that hate everything except punk rock and Christian music. Right? So it's possible that such a segment exists, or maybe they like, children's and psychedelic rock, and those two might also be together. It is possible, and I wouldn't know that if I used a method like this, so I'm going to try to discover whether that's the case. So I'm going to skip right through here. Okay, my goals are this. I want consumers who are close in musical tastes, I want them to be in the same group. Consumers who are different in musical tastes, I want them to be in different groups. It's fairly obvious. So we have to think about what is close and what is far. So let me describe what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a tool called agglomerative hierarchical cluster analysis. Agglomerative, that means putting together. Hierarchical, that means that there's an order from top to bottom. And cluster analysis means I'm just going to be doing it. Here's the way in which agglomerative hierarchical cluster analysis works. We're going to start off with, let me just take a look quickly, how many data points do I have? I've got 50 individuals responded to my survey. Anybody missing? Oh yes, somebody is missing it here. They didn't fill out all the data. So there are about 50 people. So let's imagine each person, to start, is standing on an island by themselves. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look around the room and I'm going to say, where are the two people whose musical tastes are the most similar? So let's say Indra and Ashley, just these two happen to have the most similar musical tastes. And so I had 51 islands of people, 51 individuals, and then I'm going to put the two of you together. You are now on an island together. So how many islands do I have now? 50, right? There's 49 islands of one person and one island that has two people. Now I'm going to look around, I'm going to say, where's the next most similar taste? And maybe it's Brooke and Jesse. And the two of them are going to join together, and so now they're standing on an island, happily listening to the similar kind of music on the island together. And so now how many islands do I have? I have 51, and then I have 49, right? I'm at 48, and then I'm going to look around, and I'm going to say, oh, it looks like Danny and Jared go on an island together, and so now I've got one fewer island that's out there, and then I'm going to say, oh, you know what? It turns out that Sri should join the island with Ashley and Indra, and they go together. And I'm going to keep lumping the islands together based on similarity of musical taste until I'm down to 2 islands, and then I'm going to put those together, and now everybody is back on one island. 51 people in my sample are all on the same island. So I start off at the bottom with everyone individually, and I start putting them together based on similarity until I get to the very top and everyone is all together on one island. Now it doesn't do me any good to have everybody in one island because that's where I started. So I'm going to look at the structure of how I got all the way up to the top, and then I'm going to look back at that structure, and then I'm going to back it down. I'm going to say, well, one was no good. How much benefit do I get if I go to 2 islands? Maybe everyone is already the same, they all belong in the same place, but I don't think so. So is there benefit from going to 2, in which case there's similarity, low variance within the islands, but big variance between them because they differ. And then I'm going to go back again, I'm going to say maybe 2 isn't the right number, maybe I'm going to cut one of those islands apart and 3 is the right number. Maybe I'll cut one of them apart in 4, and I'll come from the top down until I stop and say, that makes sense, it looks like 2, 3, or 4 islands. Again, getting back to Vinod, I think it was Vinod's question about ROI, and so I'll look at those segments, I'll say, are they meaningful, are they useful, are they actionable, does this Well, and there's a little bit of art to it, there's a couple of different methods that make me decide how many islands I should end up with. And by islands, I want to now say this, if you talk with anybody else outside of this classroom, nobody talks about this in terms of islands. It's just me. So we talk about it in terms of clusters, but I think it's easier to understand, to imagine yourself standing on islands being joined together. So that's how this works. Yes, Richard.
So in this example, I know it's not like normal examples, you kind of have two customers. Not only do you have the customers that are listening, you obviously have the customers that are going to buy into the ad spaces. So where do you kind of...
We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. Yeah, it's a nice, and in fact, it's also like a, Gershoff don't do it this way anymore because you add this layer of confusion, but it also adds a layer of richness that I think will come back and will a little bit help us answer some questions. So I think, who else? I think Jeff Whiteman, you asked a similar question earlier, so I'm glad that we had it.
Jeff, I wasn't paying attention.
Neither am I. No, it's good because maybe the two of you are on the same aisle. Okay, so now, if in fact, the way I'm going to do this is I start off with everyone on the same island, I'm going to find the two people that are most similar. What does it mean to be close and what does it mean to be far? So how do I get a measure of how close two individuals are? So how would I do this? How far apart are people? Anybody got an idea about how I might measure how close and how far apart people are?
K means clustering.
Well, clustering is going to, we can use a method of clustering which is going to do this for me. But I like to, in everything that we talk about, I like to get under the hood a little bit. Let's get the logic that's behind it. How do we decide? Because we can make some choices. What might be a measure of two people being similar? Yeah, Felix.
You can measure the Euclidean distance.
I can measure Euclidean distance. Okay, so that might be one approach. We'll do that. What, is there anybody think of any other measure that we can get?
Similarity. What is that?
Similarity. Similarity. In what way? Similarity by
number of features, correlated.
So we can look at correlations. Okay, so good. So two methods, and we'll talk about a couple of the methods that we can use. As a researcher, it's up to me. I get to decide what measure of distance I want to use. It will have some implications for whether or not people get put on the same island. So just for thinking about it, correlation is valuable to use if I want to group things that have similar variance. That is, I want to put together people who like blues music more than their mean, and people who don't like punk music relative to their mean, and who do like Christian music relative to their mean, and who don't like children's music relative to their mean. If people have similar patterns, I want to put them together. If I were to use correlation, that's what I would do. And that can be valuable, particularly if I'm grouping variables, I want to do that. But think about this, what that would mean is that it could be Vinod has preferences that go 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9. And Aaron, for instance, could have preferences that go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Those two individuals would be perfectly correlated because their values on each one would be above or below their mean at exactly the same place and the same time. And yet their preferences are quite far apart. Aaron doesn't like most of the music and Vinod does like most of the music in this example. In reality, it might be quite different. And so I like it, Vinod. Correlation is perfectly reasonable. In this particular case, I don't want to group that way. And so I'm going to start thinking about some other ways that I can get measures of distance. I'm going to look at it this way. So here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to delete this. And I just want to measure just how far apart people are. Because I can also think, getting back to the example of Bernard, that it could be that your preferences are 789, 789, 789, and Ashok's preferences are 987, 987, 987. We would say that the two of you are perfectly negatively correlated, when in fact your preferences are really, really close to one another. And I want to put you together if your preferences are close to one another. And so what I want to do is I'm going to look at how far apart you are the distance between you. And so let's do this. Why not? Oh, you're down at the bottom. You're already here. That was pretty easy. A-S-H-E-A. Oh, yeah. Is this you, Asher?
What's that eight? What's that eight, Bishop?
But I might have like an 8 on this one.
What do you have an 8 on? That is classical music.
No one.
Tracks with the chest.
Is that right?
You know that's night? What is night?
Okay.
Okay, so it's the one next to that.
So I'm going to look at this, so people can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to copy this just so you can see.
That's probably have to pump.
All right. So
the reggae, all right.
So we can start to see, and everybody gets to have their own preferences, and we want to respect everyone's unique differences. All right, so one thing I could do is I could try to find out, well, how far apart are these two? Do they belong on the same islands together? And what I could do is I could just say, we're going to take the difference equals this, minus this. We can see on blues, they are spot on. On Broadway, they're pretty close. Classical music, they seem to diverge. Country music, a little bit, they diverge. Electronica, they diverge. So I've got all of the differences between these individuals. And what I can do if I want to get a single measure of how far apart they are, let's make this a little bit bigger so folks can see. If I want a single measure of how far apart they are, one thing I'm tempted to do is just sum these up. Right, so I can take the sum of these values.
Average.
But I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking, wait a minute, if he takes the sum of those, what you're doing is you're, they're, for instance, 1 unit apart here on Christian gospel music, and also 1 unit apart on Broadway musical. But if you're adding these together, it's as though there's no difference. And so we don't want to eliminate some of these differences. So taking the sum doesn't work, particularly if you've got some that are positive and some that are negative in terms of where that difference is. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root of these, which will give me effectively or rather the square of these, which will give me the absolute value. So I can say equals this times this. Right, so now all of these values are going to be positive. Right? They're all positive. And I'll also point out where the differences are bigger, they get more pronounced. And so I like this feature of this particular measure because in that way, it makes it that much less likely. Even though a lot of their preferences are similar, I maybe don't want to be putting these two into the same cluster, perhaps because then I might end up playing classical music, and that might drive Vinod away because he's not a classical music lover. And so I can now think about taking the sum of these, and this gives me a measure which is a measure that Felix brought up, which is effectively the squared Euclidean distance, and if I wanted the actual Euclidean distance, remember a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I can just take the square root of this value. But I'm going to leave it in this form, the squared Euclidean distance. Felix, you happy with this? Yes. Good.
Yeah, Felix.
So this might be jumping ahead.
What else you holding on to back there?
Do you care, like, whether that's a good, I guess their scores are good or bad, so like, for example, for bluegrass, we both scored it low, but it's like a very small difference, as opposed to some of the bigger differences, but somebody has a positive feeling about it. Does that make sense? Does that matter yet, or is that a different part of segmentation?
What I'm trying to do is put people together, right? So I want groups of people that are similar, and then later on I can go back and I can find out how does this group rate this music?
Okay, so you don't care if they hate eighties?
I don't,
Not yet.
personally, I care that they hate 80s.
Yeah. But not right now.
Not right now, just, no, I just want, I would love, think about me as being such a generous person, I just want people to get along. Let's get people together who have similar preferences and put them in the same place, at least in terms of my mental model. That way I can provide something that better meets what their needs are, and avoid things that don't. Okay, so I have done this, but so that means I've taken the pairwise difference between them. How many people do I have in my sample? 50, so how many possible pairwise combinations are there? 50 times 49 divided by 2, it's a lot of pairwise combinations. So I don't want to do this work. So I'm going to let the tool do this work. And so effectively what the tool is going to do is it's going to find the two individuals that are the most similar in terms of this rating here. Then it's going to build the individual level clusters, and then what it'll do later is it's going to make some decisions about how it decides who to join the next cluster. So how do I actually put them together? And so I'm going to use one method of putting them together, and I'll show you a little bit about some of the different methods. I'm going to use a method that we call the Ward's method. And what this method does is it's going to create globular clusters. Because what I want to avoid, at least in this case, is a long, stringy cluster. Because what I could end up with then is a person that joins the cluster late might be very, very far from someone who joined the cluster earlier. So I'm going to try to form clusters that effectively minimizes the sum of the squared difference from the center of that cluster to bring everybody together. It's called the Ward's method. And I'm definitely not going to test you on what the method is. I just want you to know there's a lot, and I'll show you some methods. So I am going to delete this here, and we're going to run this analysis now. So I'm going to use a tool that's a plug-in to my computer. It's called XLStat. You may have seen on the syllabus that I recommended that you download XLStat, and then you probably found that it was not available to you. And I'm not asking you to download it. And now this is to explain why. The legislature in the state of Texas has said that the university and state agencies can't do business with particular vendors who may otherwise be doing business with certain countries. And when we went to the folks at XLStat, I don't know who they're doing business with, but we couldn't get them to sign an agreement that says that they would not do business with certain countries, and something about their legal thing. And so I have this license for like 4 more days, and then it's going to go, and then in the future I'll update with something else. But what I can do, if you're interested after class in playing with this a little bit on your own, you can go on your own to XLStat and download a trial version for 2 weeks and play with it, and I can give you some instructions on how to play with this. I just want to give you an exposure to this, so I'll show you how this works, and then we'll play with the data. So I'm going to go here to clustering data, and I'm going to choose agglomerative hierarchical clustering. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select as the data that I want to cluster all of the different musical styles. And you see over here I also have the activity preferences, and we'll play with those in a minute. So I've got all the different kinds of music. And then in the rows, I just want to make sure I have this, I'm going to have everybody's name. And this will allow us to do a little bit of deeper understanding of those clusters. And then when I go to options, I'm going to select entropy. And I will explain why I'm doing this. And then just generally, you see the distance measure that I'm using is squared Euclidean distance. But I'll show you, as a researcher, I have choices. Look at all the different ways that I can think about measuring distance. There's Manhattan and Mahalanobis and Kendall and Jacquard, a variety of different methods. And let me just give you a taste of what that looks like, just so you sort of see how the measures are slightly different. just so you have an idea. So imagine that I have only 3 customers and only 2 different kinds of music. There's someone named Jerry who doesn't like blues and he's kind of okay with Broadway music. Elaine likes blues and really likes Broadway. George really likes blues and kind of likes Broadway music. And so one way that I could calculate the distance is something called city block distance, or what's also referred to as Manhattan distance, because Manhattan is set up in blocks. In which case I would say, look, how far apart is George and Elaine? If I just take the differences and add them up, 5 and 4 is 9. That's how far apart they are. And then how far apart is Jerry from George? I just add them up and I would say that they're 9. In which case I'm saying that Jerry is just as far from Elaine as Jerry is from George if I measure in this way using the Manhattan or city block distance. But I could also measure, the way that we're going to do this is Euclidean distance, in which case I just look at what is the a squared plus b squared, c squared, and so I just take the square root of this value here, which is from these 2 movements that I made from here to here. And then I can do the same thing with Jerry to George. And so you can see that by measuring using the Euclidean distance, I would actually put Elaine as being closer to Jerry than George is to Jerry. So the way in which I measure can actually make a difference in how it is that people are put together. And so there's a variety of different measures. There's the city blocks, which is easy to understand, but it weights all the differences equally. Euclidean distance, which puts larger weights on larger distances. And that is something that I do want to do because I less likely want to put people in the same bucket who, on at least any of the attributes, are really, really different. You know, one person loves this kind of music and another one hates it. This is going to drive those folks into different clusters. The squared Euclidean method is just a faster calculation. There's Mahalanobis distances, which is sort of similar to an R-square measure. There's correlation that Anand mentioned, totally reasonable under some circumstances, but we're not going to use that now. Okay, so let me go back to my image here. So I'm using squared Euclidean, and you can see that there's a variety of different methods for deciding how to agglomerate, how to decide who goes on to what island. And I'm going to use this Ward's method. And then I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to let it run the analysis. And then let me show you some of the things that it does. For starters, it's giving me the minimum and maximum values on each one of these. I've got the means. This is just like the means that I put on the radar chart across everybody. So that's just general descriptions. And then what it's going to show me is all of the pairwise differences between people. And who did we did Ashok. And who was he different with was Vinod. Thank you, Vinod was all the way over here. Here's Vinod at 93, and that's exactly what we calculated, right? So there it is, it's done it, but look, it did it for everybody. That would have taken us a long time to do it for everybody. So it's calculated all this out. And then, this is what's kind of interesting here. This piece here, and if you want to look and follow along, under the tab that's Music 2 that's the output that I did when I ran this yesterday. So everything is the same here. So if you want to follow along, I'm on this thing, the node statistics. Right here. And what is this telling me? So I started off with 50 individuals, each on their own island. And so each person has a name, which is the number of the island that you're on. You're sitting there at address 1 through 50, each of the people. And then what I did was, what the tool did was it said, I am now creating islands that we're going to call 51. And island 51 is made up of the person who is located on island 14 and the person who is located on island 48. And if we want to know who those 2 people are, I can go back to the preference data. And person number 14 happens to be Aaron. And person 48, actually, there's a bit of a glitch here. Because I think and person number 48 is Jeff. Yeah, and the reason why there was one number that was missing in this data because somebody had not given me enough data, so I pulled it out.
Who was that?
It's me, I just swear to God, I filled it all out.
Okay.
Sure. It's just boy bands.
So now that Jim reveals himself, so Jim, what Jim did was, if you don't mind my saying.
No, please tell me, I
Jim,
don't know.
Jim did fill out all the music preferences, but then did not fill out all the activity preferences, or we certainly didn't, the machine did not collect them, let's say that.
That's a nice way of saying you didn't do it right.
It's possible that it didn't fill it out.
Good job.
We call that user error.
Yeah, it could have been. And so I didn't want to include it because then it wouldn't be possible to run the other analysis. All right, so Jeff and Aaron, the two of you have the closest musical preferences of anyone. So you guys should, exchange mixtapes and go out to, to clubs and bars together and have a good time. I will also point out that what is possible is that they're also the two people, I don't know for sure, we could actually look at their preferences here, right, that, is it the case, Jeff? No, okay, because sometimes what happens is that there's someone who said 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and somebody else also was lazy and said 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Those two are going to be the closest.
That's not being lazy, because neither prefer
Or, wait, you're right. So, maybe they're not lazy, they're actually indifferent. But usually it's kind of lazy.
Yeah, let's look at Frank's.
Is there?
Just for a game, let's see how.
5, 6, 6. Come on.
No preference, huh?
Hang on,
Shit.
Now I know what to do when I don't like what someone says. All right.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
So, is there any way to adjust scaling on this? Like, for some people that, like, maybe they put their range was 9 to 5 as opposed to 9 to 1, I guess is my best.
Yeah, I am assuming, right, it's an assumption that I make. If in fact I think that there are people that use the scale differently, I could go in and standardize everyone's scores, right? Or at that point, I'm back to doing what Vinod suggested, and I start thinking about the correlation between people. So that's other ways that I could do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that when I asked you how much do you like this music, when you rated it, you gave me your actual rating. So it's quite possible that there could be someone that has low variance and they said 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, and somebody else has low variance and they said 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. I really don't want them in the same cluster, and we're going to end up probably in different clusters using this method.
Yeah.
So you're right that there are assumptions that we've made, and if you don't like the assumptions, or the assumptions don't meet the needs of the model, then we do want to make those kind of adjustments.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've used, as I said, the Ward's method because it creates globular clusters, but in reality it could be that they're not globular. Maybe they're, stringy clusters that have weird shapes to them. And so that would mean that I'm going to try to form two groups that really don't form two groups well. And so maybe I really should be using a different calculation method to decide whether folks should be in the same or not. But then that will also lead, if the clusters look like this, if there's people way out here who are in the same cluster as people that are way over here, and that means that they're not actually going to be very similar to one another. But it may very well be that that's the natural way that the clusters are. I'm assuming that I'm going to be able to find clusters that naturally form globularly together, and that's why I'm using this method. So I like these kind of, let's have a critical eye. It's totally reasonable to say maybe this isn't doing what we want it to do. So at this point here, cluster number 51 is what used to be 14 and 48. Those addresses 14 and 48 are now gone. Those two individuals are now standing together on island 51. And then the next island or cluster is cluster 52. It is bringing together person number 9 and person number 40. I won't do this for all of them, but make friends, guys. Let's do it. So where's my data? 9 and 43 are, Frank. Actually, you're back up. And then person number 43 is Ruth. So the two of you share the most similar, next most similar.
Moderate on everything.
Which is different. Totally fine. Okay. And then what happens is 18 and 41 go together, and 11 and 49 go together, and 6 and 37. And then here, the first little magical thing, at island number 56, what happens is island number 54, which had already been created of person number 11 and number 49, person number 15, right, here's 54, now joins into island 54, and we rename it as number 56. So I now have 3 people on that island, and all of these other islands are individuals floating around out there, except for a bunch of pairs of people, a few groups of pairs. And then another group of 2, 2, 2, and now all of a sudden here at 64, island number 51, which had 2 people, joins with island number 56, which has 3 people, and I now have an island that has 5 people on it. And so I keep going up, 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 and 2s and 3s come together, and soon you can start to see there's an island of 4, and a 5, and a 6, and then as we get closer and closer to the top, a couple of the big ones came together. I've got an island that's got 13, and now 9 and 7, and 5 and 11, and a bunch of different larger sizes, until I get to the very top. And up here, island number 99 has all 50 people on the same island. So I started at the bottom with everyone being individuals, and I put them together until I got to the very top and everyone was all together at the same place. And we already know that having one island is not useful, so what if we back down and we look at 2 islands? Or back down and look at 3 islands? How do I know where to stop? Should it be 2 islands? Should it be 3 islands? So there's a variety of ways that I can do this. There are some statistical measures that might help me. One of the measures that's commonly used in this kind of analysis is something called entropy. What we're looking at is the amount of variance that's within each one of the islands compared to the amount of variance that is between those islands. And when we sort of look at how much of a change is there from going from one island to 2 islands. Because in one island, there's lots of differences in preferences. If I have 2 islands, then I reduced the amount of differences on average between them because the people on those islands are more similar in preferences. The average variance within each island is reduced, and there's more variance between them. And then I said, well, how much better do I get if I split that into, and I'm doing 3 islands? What happens? Do I get more of a benefit? And the entropy measure says we stop getting benefit and it decides to stop. So that's one measure of doing this. And then there's some visual measures that I can use as well. So let me show you that here. This is something called a levels bar chart. Sometimes it's also called a scree plot. This shows me something about the amount of variance, benefit in savings from going from 1 island to 2 islands. You can see that there's a big benefit. But going from 2 to 3, maybe not that much benefit. From 3 to 4, there's a little bit of benefit. And then soon, there's not a whole lot of benefit for breaking up into more and more smaller islands. And so we often look at this plot, which is referred to as a scree plot, because at the bottom of a mountain, when rocks fall, those rocks at the bottom of a mountain are called scree, S-C-R-E-E, I think is how we spell that. And so it sort of looks like that. And we look for the elbow points and say that's a pretty good place to stop because we're not going to get a whole lot of benefit. Where's the elbow? Kind of, yeah, it's a good word, man. Because maybe it's over here, maybe it's over here. So here's, the entropy measure has told me it is a 2-cluster solution. And so what it has done, I've got this thing called a dendrogram, which is a visual representation of how the islands come together and how much distance there is as those islands come together. And so this, at the top, I've got 1 island, everyone's in the same place. These 2 arms break off into 2 possible clusters, and that's what this says is the place to stop. But I can see just by looking at it, maybe what I want to do, the nod, is I think managerially it's going to be beneficial to break this group off from everybody else. It looks like it's a fairly large group. Maybe I would be better off trying to serve the needs musical preferences of just this group rather than this group at all. And so maybe I just won't even deal with selling to these folks. And so I think a 3-cluster solution might be better.
So can I ask, how do you come to that determination on that middle cluster?
This one here, managerial gut feel. That's one. Yeah, it's like there's not, or I've got, based on visual representation, it looks like the amount of benefit that I get from going to 1 to 2, it stopped because of this amount of benefit is so much less than this amount. So it says, look, you're not really gaining a lot. But in fact, I think you kind of do. And so I could say a 3 or 4 cluster solution might actually make sense because there is some meaningful difference, but it's all gut feel and visual observation is the way that I might do this. If I want to use a statistical measure, I can use that entropy measure, which it says stop after 2. Richard and then Jim.
Would it be more beneficial just to commit those numbers to individuals and just do a rank order? As opposed to, because that would take out the variance of like I said, like the 9 to 5 versus the 9 to 1. If you just did a rank order system, you would.
I'm not sure what you mean by rank order.
So like, let's just say you have 10 different genres of music. If you just took those numbers that we had originally done with, we were at 9 or 5 or 3, just rank order our preferences that way, and then ran it through.
Oh, I see. So, so everybody understands. So, what Richard is suggesting, which is not a terrible idea. What you're suggesting is when
I think it's a great idea. Actually,
I want to be careful.
Terrible.
It's a different. I just want to point out. You're right. Which is a different idea. A different idea is when we collect the data, rather than asking people to rate how much do you like this music, is ask them to rank. It would force people, like our friend Frank, for instance, who gave very, very similar ratings to a lot of them, it would force them to make choices to say which one do you like more and which one do you like less. And that can be valuable, there are places where it's valuable, but it has costs as well. And the cost would be, I actually believe that Frank was not lazy. I believe that Frank actually, just doesn't have a great deal of variance in the preference for the music, but likes it all about the same in the midpoint of the scale. But it's just a little bit more and a little bit less. And if I had said rank them, it would have been the ones at the 10, 9, 8, 7, I would have known nothing about how different they are, because it could very well be 10, 9, 8, 7, I like all of these, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, awful. And I would have no way of knowing that with a rank ordering, because all I would have is just where they are. Or it could be, I only like music number 10, these other ones in this order, but they're all down in the 2s and 3s is how I would have rated them. And so this, using ratings, allows me to actually see where they are on the scale. On the other hand, it does give the opportunity for someone to say, well, they're all the same. And ranking forces people to make a choice.
Well, I'm saying you keep the same system you did, and then you just take their data and do the ranking yourself.
I could, right, so if I did, if I had the, nonetheless, then I would be throwing away the information about the ratings. It might lead me to put someone together. So let's say someone only likes classical music and they hate everything else, but I can rank them. And someone else likes classical music and they really like jazz music and they really like punk music, and then they hate everything else. I might put those two in the exact same cluster because their ranking is identical in terms of order, when in fact they don't belong in the same cluster because one hates most of the music and one really loves most of the music. So it's just a question of what do you assume that people are giving you the responses, and then the tool just does what it is. It's a dumb tool. It just does what it is.
Would you clean it up ahead of time anyway, just outliers? Like, would you look at Frank as an outlier possibly and just eliminate him from the
truth
list?
is, I could. I eliminated Jim, I'll tell you that. But Jim was missing data. I don't necessarily need to for a couple of reasons. One is, generally, it would be part of a larger sample, and so it's really okay that noise is going to be in there. It might tell me a little bit more about what the population really looks like, so let's not throw away data that we have. Another reason why I might not eliminate is if there are a lot of people like Frank, they'll get likely put in a cluster together, which might then later, when we go to the Jeff and Richard question about what should we do with these clusters, I might look at them and say, these people really don't care. They exist, but they're not the ones that we're going to target. So there'll be a cluster out there that we're not going after, in the same way that the target retailer isn't necessarily going after every single consumer that's out in the marketplace. They have decided these are the consumers that we would just basically say, we know the segment exists, it's just not a segment that we're going to try to target.
But ideally, you could do multiple different ones and do comparisons of the different procedures you're doing, correct? And see how they.
That's true, and in fact, yeah, I think I've got time. We're going to look at even a different method. We'll look at one more method and how we do it, just because it's geeky fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead of the 2-cluster solution is I will try the 3-cluster solution. So I'm going to go back to the data, and I'm going to say clustering. Wait, did I show you everything I wanted to show you? Let me just make sure I dendrogram. Yeah, and then it also tells me what are the averages of those clusters. And here I've got the central objects of those clusters. Turns out Frank is the closest to the center of his particular cluster, as is Aaron the closest to his. And then it tells me who's in what cluster. But I think that we can break this down further. So I'm going to go back to the data, and I'm going to say clustering data and agglomerate. And so instead of letting the entropy measure decide where to truncate, I'm going to tell it, give me a 3-cluster solution. And if I thought it was 4 clusters, then I could say 4, or I could actually have it give me multiple, give me a 3-cluster and a 4. But let's just do 3 for the sake of discussion, because that's fun to do. And I'm going to say OK. And we'll run this analysis again. And you can see, of course, the means across the board are going to be the same. The pairwise distances are identical to one another. Everything is the same as it was before. The joining 14 and 48 are still the closest to one another. The screen plot is identical. All I did was the exact same analysis. The only difference is I told it where to cut them off. And it gives me a 3-cluster solution that looks like this. There's this group of people, there's this group of people, there's this group of people that share similar musical tastes. And in fact, now I've got these 3 different clusters, and these are the centroids. That means the middle point, the average of each of those clusters. And now I can look at a chart here. Let's see how this looks. Let's put these again on a radar chart. Get it nice and big, as big as I can, given the space that's available. A little bigger by taking this thing off so that we can see. Because I don't even think we need these labels because there's only 3 of them. Okay, and we end up with 3 different groups of preferences. And remember before, everything was pretty much the same. We can see that there's these 3 different distinct groups. There's this gray group here, right? These guys, that 3rd cluster, they seem to just love music overall, except they really are not big fans of children's music, and they don't like Christian music, not as much Broadway. But what will I play for them? 80s new wave, maybe some punk, definitely rock. I'll include the hip hop, R&B, the pop, etc. Right? So they like a lot of things, but I can see nobody likes Broadway or Christian, at least in this particular group. Then I've got this orange group of people, right? That's that 2nd group. And how would we describe them? What's really important to them? Well, they definitely don't like punk music. Don't put any of that. They definitely don't like rap music. Hip hop is not their thing. What they do like is country. What they do like is maybe jazz, maybe some pop, maybe some rock, maybe some blues. Right? So that's that group of people. You got a question here?
Yeah, I mean, this just seems to put on display why we need to standardize the scores. Because you've got this group that's like, oh, we really just like music, or we really just ranked everything higher on the scale
That's right.
than others did. And so if you standardize the scores first, then you're gonna get a better representation of what these groups of people actually
You're right.
like relative to one another.
I could standardize this quick, again, the risk in doing it, and then the question really is maybe we could do some further research to understand how are people using the questionnaire. But the risk that I standardize is that if somebody says that they, that there's a group of people that just hates everything, but that they hate everything in the same relative way as somebody who loves everything, then by clustering, I might actually find that there's two different groups. There's the group that just hates everything and the group that loves everything, and those might actually show up as being two entirely separate clusters that have similar patterns, one larger than the other. If I standardize them, that might inflate my estimate of how many people are actually in that group.
Sure.
So even though I provide, you're right, we could do it. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that
there's a trade-off.
There's a trade-off, and we have to understand the meaning when we do that. And so if in fact people are really giving me their true preferences, if I standardize, I run the risk of inflating the size of a particular group, when in fact there's people that are, yeah, relative to Christian music, I like country music, but the truth is I hate all music and I'm never going to listen to the radio station.
But conversely, if you don't standardize them, you also run the risk of skewing the data by grouping people who all just like music more rather than people who like those particular genres.
That's true. And so what I could do is, maybe there's a way that I can find a way to split this group of people that appear to like everything, but in fact they really might just like everything. And so I'm going to have like what is that one that's on the you call it Bob FM or something? I don't know if you've heard this thing, but they say they play everything. They play everything, but they do play, it's a huge variety, really eclectic kind of music that they play, and that might actually be the station that meets the needs of these folks. And they could also be the largest station out there, like the largest group that's out there. But I've also recognized, what is this blue group here? That's my extra chunky garden style, right? I may have actually found this particular group of people in their preferences. And then, what else can I do with this data? Now, certainly that's the kind of music that's going to get people to listen. I'll avoid the kinds of things like definitely don't play bluegrass if you want this first cluster, because they definitely don't like the bluegrass. Now what I can do is I can also look to see who's my team captains here. So Frank and John and Aaron, you are the closest to the middle of your groups in terms of musical preferences. And then one other thing that's fairly useful is I also have what cluster number everybody belongs to. So I'm just going to copy, first I'm going to change this, I'm going to call this music cluster. And I'm going to copy these values here. And I'm going to bring them back to the preference data that I had before. And I'm just going to dump it in right next door. So what I've got is the cluster number that each individual belongs to. And I can sort of think about if this was a representative sample of the population, I know something about these individuals and what kind of music that they like. I also then have other data that I happen to collect on their interest in going on a cruise and the willingness to pay for cruises and whether they own or rent their homes or own or rent a bike and how often they go to restaurants. Now, why might these things be valuable to me? This gets back to thinking about Jeff and Richard's question about, let's think about the profitability of these possible segments. So I sell advertising, and I might know something about who the likely advertising buyers are. So let's imagine that there happen to be advertisers that sell sports equipment and bicycles. There's advertisers that might sell to people who own homes. There might be advertisers that are selling restaurants, and I might know something about how much money I can make by selling those advertisements. Ideally, I'm going to be able to deliver them to people who are more interested in these things. So I can take a look to say, if for each of these clusters I create separate music, and I know something about how many individuals are likely to be listening, let's say it's some percentage of the total number that are in my sample, I can get an idea about how many ears there are and how interested they are. That might allow me to make some estimates about what price I can charge to those advertisers, so I can start to go down the road of what's profitable and what's not. And so what I'm gonna do, there's a variety of ways I can do this. I think an easy way is I'm gonna put in a pivot table here. And what I'm gonna do in this pivot table is I'm gonna select, we're at back of the envelope. I'm not doing any statistical analysis now, I'm just gonna look at some means. What I'm gonna select is what music cluster are people in, and let's look at the interest in the cruise and willingness to pay for the cruise, etc. And I'll include those variables, and I'll say okay. And then I'm going to build this pivot table by putting the music cluster in the rows. So you're either cluster 1, cluster 2, or cluster 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'll look at, let's say, what happened to my interest in going to the cruise? Did I miss that one? Okay, all right, I'll just put restaurant frequency, going to frequency of restaurants. This is the sum, I want the average. Let's just take a look. Right? And what do I see? Different clusters in terms of their preferences for music, but I also see that this group number 2 does not, at least they self-report, going to restaurants less frequently than group number 1 and group number 3. So if my goal for Richard and Jeff is to start to think about the value of these clusters, and I know that who spends the most on advertising on radios? It's the fast food restaurants that spend a ton of money, and this is how much money I can get in order to deliver people in particular demographics, how much money that they will give me per 30 seconds of advertising. And I know that cluster 1 and cluster 3 are the ones that are more likely to go to restaurants. Then if I were to start and only build one radio station, I might choose to build radio station number 1 or number 3, because those are the people who are interested in going to restaurants because they go to restaurants frequently. And then you might say, well, what about how large they are? So let's take that music cluster and we'll put it here, right? And this sum tells me, I want the count, how many people are in each one of these clusters, right? So this one, fairly similar in terms of how often they go to restaurants, so maybe I can sell as much advertising, and it's a little bit larger. But I gotta start with only one radio station. I'm not gonna do the big average. I might not be able to sell my advertising for as much, and people might be tuned out by my playing the wrong music. I'll build a radio station that has the kind of music that cluster 1 wants, and then what happens is I'll be able to sell the advertising to these folks because it's the people that like to go to restaurants. I could also do the same for owning homes, right? Let's take a look to see is there any difference in owning homes. These are zeros and ones, so I can take the average to get the percentage, right? It looks like in cluster 1, 86% of people own their home. Cluster 2, 100% of the people own their own home. Cluster number 3 is probably the people who rent more often. It's also interesting to see the relationship where people who definitely own homes tend to go to restaurants less frequently. At least it appears to be that way. But this will tell me something about maybe if I'm selling advertisements for Home Depot kind of products for home repair, maybe less likely to want to sell on a radio station where most people are renting because maybe they're less likely to spend as much money. And so these are the kinds of things that the advertisers are interested in, is this information about the kinds of products that these consumers are likely to use. What gets them there is the music that I play, and the music that I'm going to play is going to be based on my clusters that I create. Does that all make sense? Right? And then I can be more sophisticated. I can run some analysis to get confidence intervals around these values. Did you do confidence intervals in your statistics class? Or I can do analysis of variance or t-test to be able to show statistically significant differences between these if that's important to me. We can do more sophisticated analysis, but I won't spend our time. All right, do you want to see, quickly we'll just look at the activity preferences, take 2 minutes and do that, and then because everybody's curious. Right? Everyone's so creative. Okay. Alright, so here's all the different kinds of activity preferences. So I'm going to run my cluster analysis once again on this. So I will say clustering data, agglomerative, and here's all of the different kinds of activities. And I'm going to go ahead. So now I've just got the activities in there. Everything is otherwise the same. Which means that I've already asked for a 3-cluster solution. Here's all the pairwise differences. Here's the part where we're going to build the structure, and in this case, number 13 and number 28 are the same. Let's go out and take a look who likes to do the same kind of stuff. And that is Jeffrey Gomes. What did I say, 28? And Marcella, Willie. So the two of you have the most similar preferences of things you like to do. So you guys
We also like sitting over here.
Favorite
activity is sitting there.
Best buddies.
Right, there you go. Okay, and you can see that that structure builds much like the other one did. I think it's reasonable. There's a 3-cluster solution. It looks like there's an elbow right around there. And here's the dendrogram that shows how they're grouped. There's this big cluster, and then they're broken off into 2 smaller clusters from this group. What does this clustering look like? Sort of see. Right, and I'm going to just, I'll put this in a chart. Nope, insert, recommended.
And I forgot, was this the same scale, 1 to 9?
Yeah, this was the same scale. Yeah. And let's see if there's anything useful to see in here. Right. You can see this orange group here. Clearly, these are the folks. What do you like? Gambling, TV, professional sports, right? Those are the things that seem to be high for that particular thing.
Like gambling.
Definitely, what do you definitely not like? Animals and pets. Right, that's sort of different. Here's a group, this gray group, less into gambling, but likes dancing and partying quite a bit. The other 2 groups don't like that as much. But this group also likes activity. They're the ones that like to do the exercise and play team sports. So you can see like this group likes to watch sports, but doesn't really like to do the stuff. And this group doesn't like anything having to do with sports, this blue group, which is a little bit less happy about things overall. But they seem to like, which is sort of to John's point a little bit, they're averaging. But it could very well be that they just, of all these activities, that's what they don't like. But it's still to find like what's the thing that's going to please them the most is the caring for animals and pets and home design and reading. So they tend to like maybe things that are a little bit less stimulating externally and more about sort of the calmer kinds of things. Although if you've ever dealt with dogs and cats, sometimes it can be. And so then, what else could we do with this? We might actually look, this is kind of interesting to do. I'm going to grab the clusters, I'm going to call this activity. Keep track of the time. So this is my activity cluster grouping. And this is kind of valuable if indeed I am the cruise creator. Right, because I might know something about what my costs are associated with creating cruises. So I'm going to do, again, I'm going to put in a pivot table here. And this pivot table, let's go up here. I'm going to grab interest in going on a cruise all the way to activity. And then I'm going to put the activity cluster in the rows. So I've got 3 possible clusters you could be in. And then let's look, is there any difference in the interest in going on a cruise by these 3 groups? And what you can see is that 3rd group is really quite interested. And the other 2 are less so. So that's something that's useful to me because those people are more likely to say yes. Are they, any differences in the willingness to pay to go on the cruise? Let's take the average of those. And at least this is the average of what people say that they'll pay to go on a cruise. So it looks like this third group might be the one that could potentially bring in the most revenue, at least in terms of per person. I don't know what the size is of those groups, but we can take a look at that as well. I'll just put the activity in here, and we will take the count. We'll find out how big those are. Right, so it is a sizable group who will pay more, who wants to go on a cruise, and then I can go back again and look at that cluster number 3 and say, well, what were the things that were important to them? If that was if that was the group that likes reading and caring for animals, that is a very inexpensive thing to provide in terms of cost. Books, I guess there's weight, we don't want that on the cruise. But other than that, books don't cost nearly as much as running a casino or providing professional sports, for example. And so this could be a real opportunity. If I can only create one version, maybe that's the one that I go with. And then I could even, play with some other things about, I've got some idea about like where I might market to them if they were to send some sort of promotional materials. Do I send them to apartments or do I send them to homes? Let's take the average of this. For example, this is owning homes. Looks actually fairly similar, right, across these 3 groups. If anything, the group that wants to go on a cruise more is the group that owns homes less, and maybe that also is correlated with having children or something that they might do less.
Can you show the radar one again, I'm sorry, for this?
Yeah. Gray one is the 3rd cluster. Yeah, so these are the 3. Boating and sailing. I guess it makes sense if you like boating and sailing, you're more likely to want to go on a cruise.
But they don't like knitting.
Yeah, they don't, no, definitely not going to want to do the knitting.
They love gardening.
Yeah, so they like a lot of things. Yeah. So,
They seem to have a lot of time.
okay, so there are other methods of doing cluster analysis. This was agglomerative hierarchical where we're starting with everyone separate. There's just so you're aware of other methods, one of the other methods is something called K-means clustering, where rather than figuring out how many clusters, I'll start off with some knowledge about how many clusters I should have. So K means, how many means. And the reason why means is that K-means is sort of a machine learning approach to clustering, and effectively, the simple way to understand how it works is it does this. I'm going to randomly assign everybody to a cluster, which is dumb, right? Because obviously that's not helping. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the mean of those 2 clusters. And I'm going to put those points. And then I'm going to look, now that I've got the means of those clusters, I'm going to look at how far away each person is from the mean of those 2 clusters. And I'm going to put people closer to the mean, one of those 2 means, and I'm going to put you in those clusters. So I would say for Ashley, which one are you closer to? The left one or the right one? You're closer to the left one, so I'll put you in there. Somebody else might be closer to the right one, I'll put them there. And now I've got everyone in those 2 clusters. And then what I'm going to do is, now I'm going to take the new means of those clusters, since I've added and subtracted people, and I'll figure out what those new means are. And then I'm going to look at those new means, and I'm going to look at where everybody is, and again, I'm going to put everybody closer to what the mean is, the cluster mean that they're closest to, and I'll move them again. And then I'm going to go back, and I'm going to say, what's the new mean of those clusters? And I'm going to do that iteratively, again and again and again. And each time I do that, the amount of change is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as I get really, really close. And it'll, at some point, maybe vacillate back and forth, but essentially there'll be very, very little change. And then I will measure the amount of change from one iteration to the next. And when that amount of change gets very, very small, I'll quit. That's effectively how it works. And that is another method by which I can create fairly globular clusters of people that are fairly similar within between. So just so you know, different methods to clusters.
Does that, do you always run it with just 2 clusters, or can you?
K-means I can choose any number of clusters, and in fact, it has certain advantages because it's computationally less costly. You can see we have to calculate all of the possible pairwise combinations when I do my agglomerative hierarchical clustering with much bigger samples. That's difficult. Used to be, part of the reason why we use these methods is because computing was slow. Now, most of the computing that we do on the kinds of samples that we're working in, it really doesn't make that much difference. But that's part of why some of these other methods were developed, is it would take forever to run these analyses where we have to calculate all those pairwise. Okay, so it is 11:45. I have another activity that we want to do. I want to make sure that we have time to do that. So could you come back, can I ask you to get started at 5 to 11? Because I want to give you, there's an assignment. In fact, can I do this a little? I know it's fun to do. Let me tell you what we're doing, and then you can go and then come back and get started. But that way, if people come back early, they can get started early. Here's the exercise that we're going to do. So, show you more about these clusters later. Okay. So, if you go to Canvas and you download for session 3 RFM example data and RFM exercise handout. That's what we're going to work on in the last hour. The handout gives you instructions to do this guided analysis. And essentially what we're going to do is you have your book publisher. This is actual real data from a real book publisher. It's been doctored a little bit, but it's basically real data. I've got a list of 50,000 existing customers. I'm thinking about sending advertisements to all 50,000 customers in order to get them to buy a new book that I have. The book sells for $18. If people buy it, I get revenue of $18. I have to turn around from that revenue and give $9 to the publisher and another $3 to UPS in order to ship it. So I actually only make $6 on every book that I sell. I do not want to spend 50 cents a person on advertising to 50,000 people if I don't sell enough books. And so rather than sending out the advertisements to everyone, I'm going to take a sample of data. 4,936 people, about 10% of my entire list are going to get advertisements. And then I'm going to look at the responses that I get from my test market to see, does it look like it would be an effective plan to send the advertisements out to the remaining 45,000 and change individuals that remain on my list. And so we run this test market and we see what happens. And the data that you have is the data from the test market. And it's got 4,936 rows. That's everyone. And then, get this data open. Here we go. Here's the data that you have. And what this one indicates in this particular row is that this person, of all of the people on the list, bought the book. So there's got 4,936 people in all of in this column, and a 1 means they bought the book, and a 0 means that they didn't. And then we also have a little bit of extra information that I'm going to use. Because within the test sample, I know that there's a way I can carve up my existing customers. And the way I'm going to segment those existing customers is, how recently have they purchased from me? How frequently do they purchase from me? And what is their monetary value? What are they worth to me? And what I've done is I put them for each one of those variables, recency, frequency, monetary value, I put them into quintiles. There's the people that buy really frequently, next most frequently, in the middle, not so much, not at all. Same thing for recency, same thing for monetary value. And so I can code them in one of those 5 quintiles, And then what I do is I just concatenate these values to create buckets that those individuals live in. So this first person is in segment number 254. That means that they are in the second quintile for recency, in the fifth quintile for frequency, and the fourth quintile for monetary value. They're represented by customer type 254. The next person is in bucket number 244. So I've got everybody in my sample, but within the sample, I can carve them up into tinier little buckets represented by how recently, how frequently they purchased, and what their monetary value is. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through some analysis to help us make decisions about being as profitable as possible by thinking about which one of these segments should we target and which one of these segments should we not bother sending advertisements to because they're not going to be profitable. That's what the exercise is all about. So if you download the data, if you download the assignment to read, you can take a break now, you can take a break in a few minutes, whatever you need to, work on it. We finish in here at noon, is that correct? Yes. So at 11:30, so that's in 40 minutes from now, I will start talking. In the meantime, raise your hand, come to me, I'll answer any question. Question number 1, what do you need to break even? Question number 2, what do you want to do with this data in order to make some good decisions about who you want to target and who not? And if you want me to just give you the answer, I'll give you the answer if you're feeling lazy today. But try to work on it a little bit, and at 11:30 I'll start talking. In the meantime, work together, work alone, work by yourselves, inside, outside, give your dog a bone. We'll go on 11:30. See what you can do.
Oh my God.
I wonder if it's always been like that, or if it changed at some point.
Oh my gosh. All you do is just put the phones together.
Like an airdrop of content.
Well, this type of thing reading. How do I save it? That's it, it saves it on the. Yeah. Oh man. But you don't. Wait.
Just add me to that.
Oh, it's here, right?
No, but it's not, see, it's grayed out, found in Siri.
I don't want to do that on my address.
No, you can choose what you share, is the point. So, interesting.
Mouth with a banana.
Things going well here. How about for you? Is there?
We're upstairs with the freshers, so we're just kind of making sure they're settled into the group of like having feedback in classes and make sure they're all set for the starting the program.
Because this is the first week of the program entirely.
For the class 27, yes.
That's exciting. You remember that?
Yes, last year.
Time flies.
Let me see, these are,
This is
so this is a large.
okay.
And then this is the medium.
It's like a medium hot dog.
Yeah, right? Thank you, Lance. I needed that.
Medium, okay.
Yeah, this is the extra large
Okay, I will
size.
take that.
Thank you so much. And then you were.
He might have gone upstairs and I told him to go
Should we
upstairs.
start this or don't?
He might have went upstairs to find me upstairs so that I came down.
11:30.
Anyways.
He was looking for a specific size, do you know, or?
He was also in between sections,
Oh,
so I
okay.
just brought those down to check for him. Yeah.
What?
If anyone needs to change sizes, let me know.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Excel? Yeah. Do you need to exchange? Okay. Okay, here's the stuff.
Get mine tomorrow, I'll see which one is $9.
In the Excel app.
Coming along today?
Absolutely. Never good with surveys. Because I'm I'm not extreme on one side or the other, so.
So the shot is some of a divided by the count of previous. It's 436, the count is 436.
Oh, I forgot.
దీన్ని బట్టి నీకు అర్థమైంది నీకు రాబోయే మొత్తం రాబోయే నీ దగ్గర రావాల్సిందే కదా
Yeah, that was the
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let's build the other house first, I think. Alright.
It's not an exam, it's just an exercise. Yes, you're right.
And then after that, each row does represent, and then after that, it is
Yeah, that's.
college students.
Before I throw. Yeah.
The cost of the test number?
What?
The cost of the test data?
We're assuming there's no cost to running the test apart from spending the money on advertising. 50 cents a person, 50 cents a person, I think. Yeah, there's not, like we have to pay $100,000 for someone. Easy enough.
Why quintile?
What?
Why quintile and not, let's say,
Why not quartile or?
Yeah, yeah.
Simplicity. Yeah, so this is a simplified approach. There are other approaches that we could take. In fact, we could think about propensity scores based on exact amounts.
Okay.
Do that.
So just simplicity.
But in this case,
Okay.
it was quintiles for simplicity.
Got it.
So do you have experience with pivot tables?
Yeah.
Some people are more comfortable than others, so that, part of this exercise is just another opportunity to work with them and sort of think about them.
Are we using the example data or that's the soft one?
You have the example data.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I have it solved.
Perfect, thank you.
about this. In that cell, 111, you're absolutely like 21% purchase. So, how much money did you spend on advertising?
Do we know how many combinations of 111 there are?
Yeah, you can do that if you go back to the pivot table. Yeah, okay, so you just click on the pivot table anywhere and it opens it up. And then you can just bring in RFM segmenting. We're gonna slide it down here. And then instead of sum, we want to count how many people. No, it's 113. In fact, if you did the sum of bought and test offers, that's the total number of bought and test offers. And then you divide one by 100. And it'll give you this exact value. So it's just different ways to do it. And then this just sort of, how much did you spend?
Advertising, for this being one person responsible.
See what is it? Now, and that's like, we're gonna visually look at each one. Did you do the break even?
No.
Okay, so think about, we're on completely, super on the right track. But if you sort of think about the break even, here's 21% of people bought. Is that enough to make money?
Yeah,
Year zero, definitely you lost money on these tests. Yep, that's what you're doing. That's good, yep. So, like, I love the back of the envelope, eyeballing it, and you're 90% there without having done any work. I like that.
No, for sure.
I just have
Yeah.
and just want to why 125
Yeah, just to take a look at what makes them different.
1, 5 to 1, 4 to.
Got it.
Well, did you make money?
More than 1 0.
More than,
That category.
so is that the percentage of people that purchased?
It is what average.
The average. So that means that in segment number 2 or 4, 12% off.
Yeah.
So you make money with 12%. What percentage of people do you need to buy?
What you're doing is. See the threshold.
Yeah. And there's a couple of ways to do it. You can brute force it, right? So just tell me how much money you spent, send me advertisements. How many books did they buy? How much you make on each book? You can figure out what's the profit. Or we can calculate what the break-even percentages needs to be, and you can do that with a little bit of algebra.
So we have like money sent per book.
Yep. Yeah. So it's 50 cents per advertisement.
Okay.
And then. I think you're on the break.
Thank you.
Trying to do the what? Okay, yeah, it's good, yeah, so right. Oh, and the hint to sort of think about this is, imagine you have 100 customers to 100, so that's a 1% each. The amount of money that you get for a book is what, $6, right? So you end up with $6. If it costs you.
Oh, that's, I thought it was.
Yeah, so you're sending advertisements out to 100 people, 50 cents a piece, you spend $50. You sell one book, you get $6. That's 1%. That's not enough. 2, still not enough. 3 is not enough. When I get to 9, that's got to be enough. 54 is more than 50, so that's good.
1 to 2 profit.
So I get $6 per book.
Got it.
If I spend 50 cents a person on 100 people, that's $50. If I sell 9 books, 9 times 6 is 54, so I made $4. So I'm above. So 9 is good, 8 is not quite enough. You haven't done any work and you know it's about 8 enough. So can you get me exactly?
Yeah.
You're on, you're
You did the available mall. But so basically, of the 21%.
see how we can the sum is the key thing.
I mean, have to read the data, the files, you know, calls, you know, whatever. What value do you use for this?
So now I can see insert which one's the center. Is that enough?
Yep, I'm nowhere near.
You like it?
Yeah, but how do you take it?
You can create
Okay, but then how do you? Speed average, but how many? Like a one way.
Oh, it's on the sun.
Where are you seeing average? Yellow. No, yellow I think.
Cooperation, together, help each other, compete a little bit. Happy to find out that they're friends more than they even knew. Anybody need a hand with anything up?
So this is other question. So this is saying that 12.5% bonus.
Correct. 12.5% of the people in segment number 214, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, I just want to be sure that I'm reading the thing. 12% or 12.5% of those people bought. So is that above your break-even rate?
The break-even rate is 8%, so yes.
So that's a profitable segment. That suggests that when I roll out to the rest of the market, you want to send to those people.
The number of customers. What you create. Do you create a sounding code? That's why
One doesn't have the accuracy, $2 is the revenue, but you're not actually, that's not profit. So if you've got to buy the book, and you're not spend $9 and $5, it's $6, $3. They only get $6. Well, how many $6 books do I need to sell? Right, I'm not sure.
So on the first one, I just like you asked.
We are not there yet.
so the sample.
So minimum profit up here, and you're looking for again.
I'm looking for what percentage of users do they purchase. So I need that represented 8.4%, which is older. So we're on the right way, hold on.
like, talk about it, like, or are they pro market dollars? Yeah, profit. We're taking the call and they I'm sure not. She's there, she got that. I've got a list. I'm pretty much on stuff off of it.
I need any hints or just.
You get a board or yes. And now you need to call out. You got nine. Gotcha. 9 people bought it. No, everybody.
So this particular section, right?
Yeah.
So
for section
what's your profit?
Thank you. Yeah, so profit cost for sale. And then 353 sale plus shipping. Whatever. Next. 3.6 plus.
So,
What do you wanna know? First thing that we might wanna know is, you said you wanted to know how revenue is set. So let's put RFM 75.
Are you looking at 111?
we're looking at 144 and the total cost of the asset.
So now he selects to,
0.5 trains, counts,
it's 4936.
And you now know how many people. And then you also wanna know how many purchased.
Yeah, that's good.
And you wanna know what percentage. Exactly.
Which question is this?
Okay, that's.
You in good shape?
Right.
I don't know, doing it for costs that are ready to do it versus dedicated revenue and dedicated costs that we got to have. What is this?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was doing. I mean, I didn't get the same number, so.
Yes.
24 and 5.
Which is checking out the cost of the
Yeah. What did you get?
I'm not even fighting it right now. Because that's really just.
It's a fixed cost.
Right.
Big difference.
You're not doing that, right? You're not fixing the cost for assets.
number of customers.
It's the end of Q2, and end of it. You just want us to give you the actual profit, what it will be.
What is the profit or loss? How much money do they make on it?
Why did it, I'm sorry, I mean, what is the suggested on the probability of this?
Oh, yeah.
You want the exact number?
You don't have to, but you get the idea.
If you were to roll out all sets of
What?
I mean, you could roll out two
Yeah, so now they're sending to what I see, right?
50 cents. 50 cents for the hour, yeah.
So actually, if you the average. So 468 over 49.
Yeah, so then.
Okay, what percentage?
So this is the first question, you're saying this is
Offer, what?
5,000 or something.
I don't see what what's So all these Q1, Q2, Q3, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, this is
We have
Alright, cool, so we'll do a little bit.
Yeah, that's what it's based on.
Because there's 4 of it. You spend that, even the
Getting cut.
and that's sort of think about what is the total fixed cost that we spend that we cover through my sales.
No, the two things.
Not
What I did, I set the expression up as profit total, those that sample times 50,000 and divided by the sample size. Meaning of your error.
If I had 100 people, if I had 100 people, it cost me $50 an hour. 0 people buy the books, I spend $50 an advertising. Well, 100 people buy the books, still spend $50. So then, how much money do I make on every book? $2 in revenue. Then I gotta spend $9 I'm gonna pay to produce it. Another $3 I'm gonna give to UPS and we'll produce it. So I'm gonna make $6.
Yeah, just send to all.
I send that to everybody. So I'm gonna spend on the people that buy it. So one is a variable cost, the other is
Yes, but then you roll it out to every. So what is the rule there? $6.
You're including you're assuming you only spend the money on the advertising money on those people that buy books. So you sort of think, let's say you had 100 people, you'd spend $50 advertising to all of them. Sort of think about it as a one-time $50 cost. You gotta make that up. If nobody buys books, you're not gonna get your $50 back.
We want to determine just really how many buyers
Yeah, with.
Yeah, and that's what we did in that test market. We actually sent everybody out, yeah.
Okay, so if I get to the 47 segments, that number or late or and how much more having to count how many are in each of these segments, right?
Yeah, and easy enough to get a count of how many are in each of those segments. We can just use the pivot table, and drag RFM segment down into here.
I heard that. It will give me the count of the total, which is 497.
Yeah, so if you put, let's put, this gives me the sum, but if you click on that, you can say count. Right, and then if you put RFM segment into rows again, now you know this is the number of individuals in each one of those segments in our test model. Does that help?
It does, so I would have had to capture all 47 within the percentage above it.
Cool, yeah.
I figured out how to get from there.
As long as conceptually you have it, that's the goal.
Oh, you're doing it.
So I just calculate, here's what I do. If the cohorts bought X whatever percentage is greater than the break even, now your blueprints will have what's the pot that you're generating.
Okay, so,
Last one. That's fine. But I basically. One question. But I don't have a lot of confidence.
okay.
Different ways to get there.
Now you've got these boxes.
You wouldn't
Ready for you to come over here.
Okay, all right.
Maybe Travis.
Just look at the number of.
So what I'm gonna do, you know you're gonna copy this, these are values right next to it.
So yeah, basically.
They're good in the space that they're in, but once you wanna do something with them. That's what I do, and it's not really the best.
Right.
You want to get some user, but I don't want to.
It's marketing completely.
Glad that. What is the question?
Yeah.
How much more can the fund
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I see. Yep.
Oh, on the back.
Yeah, on the back. You hadn't sent the mail to those sites.
Deleting those. Nobody bought books, they didn't know about it. You lost all the sales that happened to the books. And you didn't spend the money on the side. I couldn't put any more, right?
How much more can you make?
Right, and then the real question, not so much how much more, how much less could you have I could have spent more in advertising and earned, you know.
To certain segments, I think that's how you do that. Like you wouldn't.
What I didn't do is add how the sales.
Because you might assume that they might on their own come across something.
I have 70.
Well, actually, you can. If you actually.
$340.
Actually, you just want to have. So if you were to.
I got this. Here's what I here. This is the 340.
Like these, like these little pieces of what I did.
Maybe I already did.
But the same, like 5,000 is more than the rate that he's gonna sell to them. So it's roughly 16. So quantity times $6 times the percentage. I think of GP. I mean, we can subtracting 50 cents per.
So you're actually figuring out what's the profit of each. That's totally different. And in a way, when you think about this,
How do you know that those people that you listen at are part of these customers?
okay, I'm gonna move forward because I think we got about 25 minutes or so. I'm gonna make sure that folks get to eat lunch and go to other classes. So I'll go through, we'll look at some of the answers. I'm also gonna mention there's a homework that is live, or is about to become live, and the homework is very similar to this problem, but with one caveat, and I will tell you what the caveat is just so that you're aware. What we're going to do here is very similar to what your homework is, but in your homework, you've got even more information than you have in the problem that we're working on here, and I will tell you where that is just so that you know. So in this problem, we're told that we can spend, in fact, we did spend 50 cents on advertising to each individual in a sub-segment of my entire list of existing customers. So when we sort of think about, from the business perspective, what have we done? We have first segmented on a what question. What are the behaviors? People who have purchased from me before. We're not looking at new customers at all. This is from existing customers. When we think about acquiring, retaining, developing customers, this is about retention strategy, developing these customers by generating more profit from the customers we already have. And we're also going to segment based on other behaviors of the customers. How recently have they purchased? How frequently have they purchased? And some information about the profitability of those customers that we'll work on tomorrow, this notion of monetary value. So we have that information. 50,000 customers. We don't want to spend all of the money on advertising if it's going to turn out that we're not going to make money on this. So let's run a test. So we're going to randomly select about 10% of the customers. We'll send the advertisement out to them. We'll see what the response looks like, and we'll determine whether or not we should move forward and send to everybody else. So let's sort of look at step one. What do we need to have happen in order for us to be profitable? And so that question is, what do we need in order to break even? What percentage of customers need to purchase in order for us to break even? And as I listened around, it sounded like most people got this. The contribution that I earn from each book before I pay for my advertising is $6 per book. But I spend 50 cents on advertising. If I spend 50 cents and send to 100 people, that was $50. And if nobody buys any books, then I lose money. I lose that $50. If everybody buys a book, all 100 people buy a book, then I earn $600 in contributions, $6 times 100, minus the $50 in advertising. John?
Doesn't that fail to account for people who might have bought the book without being advertised to?
Right, and I'm going to assume, at least for this model, people who are not advertised to don't know the book exists.
Okay,
They're not going to buy it. And the rate at which people would on their own respond is very, very low. This is the only way to respond. Yeah. And I will also add, this is it's data that we got from an actual book seller, but we chopped it down into a very specific amount of data, and we monkeyed with it a little bit so it can't be identified.
But practically speaking, how would we account for that? Like in the real world, when we're advertising to potential customers, how do we account for customers who would have bought without us having advertised?
Let me come back to that, because your question is a question of attribution, and it's very difficult to know when I spend money on advertising and I get a sale. Is it because of the advertising, or is it because of this advertising and something I did on the internet?
Sure.
And is it because of advertising I did 10 years ago, and now that I run this advertisement again, now they're more likely to react to that advertising. Attribution is a very difficult thing to do. With online systems, there are some ways that we can do this because we know who we sent ads to, and then we can see what the response is. We can see if there are other people that purchased that we didn't send ads to, and then maybe we can get rates of purchase that are associated with that. For this model, we're just going to assume, if I don't send the ad, I would assume that they're not going to purchase it. Thank you. But good point. Okay, so now what does this mean? This means that if I start to think about, well, of the 100 people, how many books do I need for them to buy? If you get $6 from each book, if I sell 8 books, that's only $48. 8 out of 100 is 8%, that's not enough money. If I sell 9 books, that's $54, that's more than the $50 in advertising. So somewhere between 8 and 9, and then I can calculate it out to 8.3. Another way some people may have solved this, I sent the ad to 4,936 people. It was 50 cents per ad. The contribution of the book is $6. So the amount of money I spent was $2,468 on advertising 50 cents each to these 4,936. So how many $6 books do I need to sell? 411. So I would call this the break-even volume, the number of books that I need to sell. Then if I want to think about this in terms of percentage, I just divide the 411 books by the, divide the 2468 by the 411, and that gets me the percentage that I need to sell, 8.3%. So you can solve it any way you want, just a variety of different approaches to thinking about how do I get the break-even volume and the break-even rate. So for your homework, you're going to have to solve what is the break-even rate that I need. And so I'm going to go back to my raw test data, and I'm not going to do any pivot tables yet. We can just take a first quick look at this raw test market data. And so here's what I need in order to break even, 8.3%, so this is what I've already described. Let's look what actually happened in the test market. So I'm going to make this bigger here. Actually, let's do it this way. I'm going to say, well, how many books did we actually sell, right? So I needed to sell 411. If I take the sum of this column right here, I can see I sold 468 books. So right away, I can see I sold more books than I needed in order to break even. I needed 411, I sold 468. I needed 8.3%. I'll come one second. And then I can say, well, what is the average? Since these are ones and zeros, I can see that the percentage of people who bought books in the test market was 9.48%, which is above 8.33%. I must have made money, and in a second we'll look at that. Lance?
Yeah, it's 50,000 mailings, right? At 50 cents each?
Right now, from a list of 50,000, I have subsampled 4,936 of them.
But I'm talking about total advertising cost is not 2,500, it's 25,000.
Yeah. In question one, yeah.
Correct.
You're off.
Yeah. Still sending no.
Yeah, because question one says if you mail advertising to the 50,000.
Oh, if I had mailed the advertising to the 50,000, if I had done it, it would cost me 25,000. And how many people would I need to purchase? Somewhere in the 4,000 range, which would be 8.3% of all of those people. But I instead of doing that, I ran this test market, which was only 4,936 people. And that's what I'm looking at, is what happened in the test market. So, sorry, I jumped over that first question of what would have happened if I sent to everyone. Again, that's 4,936 out of that original list of 50,000. So you're on the right track. I think we're all on the same place. Okay, so what actually happened in this market? 468 books were sold. So I can look at, did I make money here or not, right? So I sent advertisements to 4,936 people. I spent 50 cents on each advertisement, so my total cost of advertising was $2,468. I sold 468 books. I brought in $6 for each book. So I brought in $2,808 from the test market. So I made $340. Is everybody okay with what happened in the test market? And so it suggests that maybe it would be okay to send advertisements out to everybody else because it looks like this is a moneymaker. I need 8.3% and I'm hitting a rate of 9.48%. So it looks like this would be a profitable strategy going forward. I can also say, again, there's that percentage of people that purchased in the test market above the break-even rate. And so now I can start to think about, well, what would happen if I sent out to everybody else? Well, the test market was a representative sample I randomly selected from that set of 50,000 original people. So I'm going to expect that that market shows me something about how everyone else is going to behave. So what's left that I have not sent to, what I'm going to call not the test sample, but the rollout sample. It's the remaining people, it's the people that, it's the actual, I'm going to really roll out this program. There's 45,064 people on my list who have not received advertisements. What do I expect to happen if I send to those 45,000 people? So there's a couple of ways that I can get estimates on this. One is to say there's 45,064 people that remain that I did not send advertisements to. They cost me 50 cents a person. That'll be a cost of $22,532 to send out advertisements to everyone else. How many books do I expect to sell? I expect to sell, what did I do? I took the 45,064. Since I got a 9.48% rate of purchase in my test market, I'm going to expect there's a 9.48% of purchase in the remaining data. And so I can estimate that I'll sell 4,272 books and change. You can say, well, you can't really sell 0.68 of a book, but it's just an estimate. And so I won't bother doing rounding at the moment. If you want me to round it down to 4,272, we can do that too. And so how much money do I bring in? I expect to bring in $25,636 in contribution before I paid my advertiser and they're sending me the bill, and then I got to send the bill for the 50 cents each of the 22,000. So I would expect to make on the remaining folks a profit of $3,104. So is everybody okay with this? Do they get something similar? If not, at least you sort of see where I am on this. Another way that I might approach this, and again, I've not done anything with pivot tables yet, I'm just using some logic. I can think about how much larger is that rollout sample relative to my test market. My test market was about 10%, so 1 of 10 pieces. The remaining group of people that have not seen the advertisement must be about 9 pieces, so it's about 9 times larger. And in fact, I can calculate it exactly. I've got 4506 in the rollout sample, 4936 in my test market, so it's about 9.12 times larger. I expect that I'll send advertisements to 9.12 times more people than I did in the test. I expect 9.12 times more people will purchase, and I expect that I will get 9.12 times more profit, since this is representative of the overall group. And so I can calculate it out that way. Here's how much money I made in the test market. Here's how many advertisements that I'll send, scaled up by 9.1265. This number times 9.1265, 22,532, and just 9.12695 times more than 340 is 3104. Everybody okay with just a couple of ways to approach how much should I expect to make based on the results of the test market if I send the advertisements out? The test market was successful, I made money. They purchased at a rate that was higher than the break-even rate, so it says, go ahead, roll out to everybody. So far, so good? Okay. Now, pause, we'll say, well, wait a minute. Within my sample of data, within my list, I have have more information that I can segment even further. Everyone is not the same. There are some people that purchase more recently, some that purchase more frequently, and some that have more monetary value. Let us carve up the market into those little pieces and see within those little pieces, were all of them profitable or were some of them not as profitable? So I will go over here as big as I possibly can. Okay, so here is the output from my pivot table. This is segment number 111. This is how many people are in segment number 111. Let me just move right.
What did you put there? I don't have any of that in my computer.
Oh, okay. Let me show you how I did it. Okay, go back. Here's my raw test market. I'm going to select this data, insert, pivot table, RFM segment. And then look what I'm going to do. So RFM segment in the pivot table has each one of the possible segment numbers. Here's 111, 112, 113. I just slid that into rows. And what do I want to get? I want to know, let's say for instance, how many people are in each segment. I can slide this down here into this box called values. It's now adding them up. I don't want that. I want to count. So I'll say value field settings count. Hit OK. And so now I know that there's 113 people in segment number 111 in my test market. How many then people do I expect to be in segment 111 in my remaining data?
Same percentage.
About 9.12 times more. I'm going to scale it up into a larger amount. But right now, let's look at that test market. So I've got that count, and then I want to know how many people actually purchased. So I'm going to take bought the test offer, and I'm going to slide that down into here. And so what is that? Let's take that. That's the sum. So that tells me how many were purchased. And in fact, then I can say, well, what percentage bought equals this value here divided by this value here is 21.2% of people in segment number 111 purchased the book in that segment. Or I can do it this way. I can say, let's look at bought the test offer, and rather than the sum, which is going to give me again, let's change that to the average, since those are ones and zeros. And so that means that 21%, this is just this divided by that, 21% of people in segment 111 bought the test offer. So now what I'm going to do, just for having a look at this, let's copy this. Because pivot tables can be annoying to work with sometimes. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste the values next door, so I've got this information. This is the data from the test market. This is the percentage of people that purchased. Now what I can do is I can look at this data and say, what was the cost of sending advertisements out to each of these groups? So I will say cost of advertising. And the cost of a single ad, cost of single ad, is how much?
50 cents.
50 cents. Okay, so that's the amount of money that I spend on a single ad is 50 cents. So I'm just going to say the amount of money I spend on advertising to these folks is equal to 50 cents times the number of people I sent the advertisements to, $56.50. And I can just drag all this down here. And I know how much money I spent on advertising to each one of these segments. And if I take the sum of all of these values, it's the sum of this column, right, I get $2,468, which is exactly the amount of money that I said if I say equals the 4,936 people times the 50 cents is 2,468. So it makes sense, but I now divided up all of my advertising costs by each one of those individual segments. So this is my fixed cost for sending advertisements to those segments. And now I can look at what my contribution is in each one of the segments per sale, right, is how much do I make on each book that I sell? $6, right? And so how much money did I make from this group? I sold 24 books. I made $6 on each book, so equals the $6 times the number of books that I sold. It's $144. Right, so that's how much money, and then what's the sum of that, right? Right, 2808, we've seen that before, and then, so how much money did I make overall? Before we saw 2808 minus the 24, oops, right, equals the 2808 in contribution.
Minus.
Like minus, Andy, you can do it. Yeah, $340, right? So that's across everybody. I can now look at that inside each one of these segments. How much money did I make on segment 111? Equals the contribution minus the cost of the advertising. So I could just drag all these down. This is everything. And you can see that there are some segments where I lost. The count is the number of people that are in segment 111 in my sample, right? Okay? And so I would expect that there's 113 people in segment 111 in my sample, right? In the rollout, it's going to be 9.12 times that number of people for everybody else. So now, what you can see is that there are some segments for which I have lost money. And maybe I could have made more money if I don't send out to everyone. So if I send the ads out to everybody else, if I ignore the fact that there's loser segments out there, I can start to think about, well, how much money would I make by sending out these ads? So let's call this expected number to roll out. The count is 113 people in segment 111 equals this 113 people times 9.12, what we say, 9.1265, close enough, right? So I believe in that rollout sample, there's about 1,031 people in segment number 111. And then I can just drag these numbers down to know how many people there are in each segment. So that's the total number, and if I add that up, equals the sum of this column. Is that someone telling me it's lunchtime? We'll get there. There's that 45,000, just about 45,000, right? Okay? And then, so how